Are you eager to harness the potential of SwiftUI, Apple's cutting-edge framework for iOS app development? Then join me on the SwiftUI Bootcamp, a comprehensive and hands-on learning experience designed to transform you into a proficient iOS developer. In today's fast-paced tech landscape, iOS development and SwiftUI is one of the most sought-after skills in the industry. By mastering SwiftUI through this bootcamp, you're not only equipping yourself with the ability to create powerful iOS apps, but also positioning yourself for high-paying jobs in the tech industry, where iOS developers are paid an average salary of $120,000 a year, guys. I'm Stefan, and I'll be your instructor on this amazing journey. I'm a former senior iOS engineer at Meta, and I'm a self-taught programming professional. And this bootcamp is going to offer you a structured curriculum that covers the essentials and advanced aspects of SwiftUI to turn you into a monster developer. So we're going to start with the basics and work our way up to building stunning user interfaces with SwiftUI. So you guys are going to learn to design captivating and interactive user interfaces that are both visually appealing and functional. We'll also learn how to understand data flow, so you'll gain expertise in managing data flow within your application, which is a crucial aspect of building a robust app. We'll also explore navigation and animation, so discover how to create seamless navigation and engaging animations to enhance our users' experience. And ultimately, we'll be building real-world projects, guys. You're going to apply your knowledge and skills to build real-world apps, preparing you for the demands of the industry. And you also have lifetime access to this stuff, so you'll enjoy lifetime access to the course materials, ensuring that you can revisit and reinforce your learning whenever needed. By the end of this bootcamp, you'll not only be prepared for a lucrative career, but also have the freedom to choose where you work, whether it's from the comfort of your own home or from a tropical paradise. Join us today and take the first step towards a bright and rewarding future in iOS app development. We'll see you there, guys. Peace. What's going on, guys? Stefan here from App Stuff, and I am so excited that you decided to join me on this amazing journey of how to build apps with SwiftUI. So we're going to have a ton of fun, but first we need to go over what you need to get started. So there's going to be one thing that is required and one thing that is optional. So make sure you stick with me to the end of this video to make sure that you have everything you need to get started on our journey here. So the first thing, and this is required, guys, is that you have Xcode downloaded. Now, at the time of this video, Xcode recently released an update. So the newest version is Xcode 15. So go ahead and get that downloaded. And this is what we're going to be using to build our applications. We're going to write all of our code here to ultimately build out these awesome applications that we are going to see in the bootcamp. So that's thing number one, and that is required. So how do we get that if you don't already have it? So you're going to open up the App Store, guys, and you're going to search for Xcode. That's just Xcode up in the search bar up here. And then you're just going to select this option and you are going to hit download. So that might take a bit of time to download, but once you get that downloaded, just go ahead and come back to this video. So thing number two, this is optional, not required, is going to be the Swift Programming Fundamentals course, guys. So this is sort of phase 2 of my iOS developer bootcamp. That means the SwiftUI bootcamp is phase 2. Programming Fundamentals with Swift is meant to be phase 1. It is not required that you take that to get started with this course. However, at some point during the SwiftUI Bootcamp, you're going to want to come back and take this fundamentals course here. And that is available on my website at stefancodes.com. And it's just this programming fundamentals with Swift guy. So if you're watching this on YouTube, the link will be in the description. If not, let me show you guys how to get there. Just go to stefancodes.com, go to courses, and it's this option right here. So once again, that's not required, but at some point, you guys are going to want to stop what you're doing with the SwiftUI Bootcamp and go back and take this just to make sure you have a solid understanding of the fundamentals of programming before we try to get ahead of ourselves with building apps with SwiftUI. Got to have a good basis and a good foundation before we can try to build upon that and start building applications, right? Programming is what we use to build apps. So you want to make sure you're a solid programmer before you actually start building apps. So that's going to be it, guys. just make sure you have Xcode. And if you haven't taken the fundamentals course already, at some point you're going to want to do that. But like I said, it is not required to start the bootcamp. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the first module of our bootcamp, where we're going to be setting up our project and walking through the ins and outs of Xcode before we get started. What's going on, guys? Hope you are doing well. In this video, we are going to be going over how to set up our Xcode project and covering some of the ins and outs of how Xcode works and how we're going to be building applications with SwiftUI. So to get this started, guys, we are going to create a new Xcode project. So to do that, you're going to open up Xcode and you can either go to File, New, and select New Project right here. Or you could hit Command-Shift-N as the shortcut to do that, and it should open this window up for you. So next up, from this platform list that you see here, we're going to select iOS. We're going to be building iOS apps here, and you're going to select this application format. So hit Next, and this is where we're going to name our project. So I'm going to call this SwiftUI Bootcamp. And for the team, guys, this is not important. It's okay to have none selected if you don't see anything showing up there. Organization identifier, you could sort of map it out like this, com, dot, and then whatever your first and last name are. Also not super important here. And then just make sure the interface selected is SwiftUI. This is very important. We are going to be building apps with SwiftUI, not UIKit and storyboards. And then make sure your language is Swift, and we do not need core data or tests. So let's go ahead and hit Next and hit Create. And this is going to create an Xcode project for us, guys. So you're going to see here that we have some code to start with right off the bat. This is automatically generated anytime we create a new project in SwiftUI. And you guys are going to see this preview on the right side here showing up. And the code that we see over here, guys, is what produces the application that you see on the right-hand side over here. So really quickly, just want to talk a little bit more about that, how SwiftUI works, and everything that's going on in Xcode that you see here. So this left side menu, guys, that you see is what is known as your project directory or your project navigator. So this is where all of the files for our project are going to exist. All the files, all the folders, all that good stuff. So this is how we're going to navigate between files. This you see here that has all of the code. This is known as our editor. So this is where we are going to be typing all of our code that is going to ultimately produce mobile applications. And then the interesting part, like we just talked about over here, is our preview. So the preview is a feature in Xcode that is particularly useful when working with SwiftUI. It allows you to see a live preview of your SwiftUI views while you're writing code. So really quickly, guys, if you were to go and look in the editor and maybe just like delete the world there and make the text just say hello, you guys will notice that that automatically in real time updates the interface of my application in the preview. So the code that we type over here will produce this preview and how it looks over here. And we'll be able to see those updates in real time, which is so cool. So this real-time feedback significantly speeds up the development process and helps you design and test your UI without needing to run your app on a simulator or a physical device. So really quickly, just to actually run this application and see what it looks like on a physical device, we can go up to this menu that you see here. You guys should see a list of devices. Right now, where I'm selecting iPhone 14 Pro. You can select 14, 14 Plus, 14 Pro Max, iPhone SE, whatever you want. So I'm selecting 14 Pro. And if you guys go up and hit this play button up here, or just hit Command R, that will actually build and run your project here, guys. And you'll see this build succeeded message. And what that does is it compiles all of this code that we have in our project here and actually launches the application on a physical device. So this is our iPhone simulator, and this represents what the app would look like on a physical device. So if you were to actually run this app on your iPhone. And what's really cool is we could hit like the home button here and we see that this like fully mimics an actual iPhone, right? And then you can see our app down here in the corner. You guys are probably going to show up somewhere different on the screen. And I can click on that and it will actually launch my application. And I have all of like the iPhone functionality here. So this is really, really cool. And we're going to be using this quite a bit once we start building full-scale mobile applications. But the difference between this and the preview, guys, is that this preview we have here in Xcode simply gives us a preview of the application. So it's really useful for development purposes because we don't actually have to build and run the application on a physical device to test things and check out what our UI looks like or test basic functionality, right? Like, for example, making that simple change here where I just changed the text, I can see this take effect in real time. So when you build the application and launch it on the simulator, guys, it pauses the preview. So to resume that, you just go up here and hit that refresh button. So that looks really, really good, right? And we can see those updates taking place in real time. So that saves us a lot of time and really speeds up the development process. So you guys could imagine if you have a really, really large application with potentially millions of lines of code, something like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, that building the application takes a lot of time, right? Our app right now is literally like less than 30 lines of code. So it takes almost no time to build. So as things get larger, Xcode takes longer and longer to build those things. And if you want to make really simple changes to a screen, like we just did there, you don't want to have to build and run the application every time you want to see those changes. So that's why the preview is really, really useful for us and really helps speed up the development process here, guys. We can see those changes and updates in real time. So that's just a brief breakdown as to how the preview system works and how SwiftUI works in general with like building applications. And we're going to be diving into the actual modules of this course and how to use SwiftUI to build mobile apps in the next video. But before we finish this one, guys, I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on with all this code here. So I don't want this to look like straight up gibberish to you. I want to break it down very briefly just so we have an idea of what's going on. So we see here that we have this content view, right? And if I go back to my project navigator, this is this content view. So this preview is rendering out this code that we have in our content view, and the root view of our application. So when we launch our application is this content view. And to see that, you guys could go to this app file. So this is like the main file for your app. You see the main keyword here. This indicates that, hey, this is the thing that launches our application, this SwiftUI Bootcamp app file, right? We see that it's an app and we are launching our content view here. So this is the root view of our application, which is why it opens up to this page as soon as we launch our app, right? So we go back to this content view and we see that this is a struct. It's called content view and it is of this view type, right? So this is just saying, hey, this content view is a view. This body is what is going to make up the content of this view. So we have to have this body property. And then inside of that body, we have some code. And this represents like the guts of the actual screen, guys. This is what actually builds out what you see here. Don't really worry too much about what this stuff is. We're going to cover this in a lot more detail and get a ton of practice. But we can see here that we basically just have an image. That's where we get this globe guy. And then we have this text component, which is where we get this guy from. And then we apply some padding and all that stuff. But don't really worry about that. This stuff that you see down here is what renders out this preview, guys. So if I were to go and comment this out, you'll notice that it automatically closes out the preview of my application or in Xcode here. So as soon as I comment this back in, you guys will notice it automatically opens the preview back up for me and it launches that just like that. Really quickly, to manually open and close the canvas that this is called, or the preview, you guys can go up to this button right here, and if you select show editor only, it will remove that. And then if you go right here once again and you select canvas, it will launch the canvas for you. So if you guys are unfamiliar with what like something like a struct is or casting it as this view type is, I highly recommend stopping everything you're doing right now and taking the Swift Fundamentals course. So that is the foundation that we need in order to understand how to build apps with SwiftUI, guys. A lot of people like to jump straight into the app development stuff because that's what's the fun stuff, and you get to see things come to life right before your eyes. But you really need a strong basis in the fundamentals of programming before you get started here. You can start this course, but you are eventually going to have to go back and do the fundamentals anyway. So I highly recommend just doing that now if you haven't done that already. This is supposed to be part 2 of the overall iOS Developer Bootcamp series. So you need the fundamentals first before you can start learning how to build apps. And all of this stuff is broken down, like what a struct is and how to cast things and all of that stuff, guys. So make sure you take that before you take this course. But anyway, now that we have gone through an overview of how all of this stuff works, some SwiftUI stuff, some Xcode stuff and all that, we're going to hop into module 1, where we are going to be going over how to add text to our application and covering all of these modifiers that we see here, which help us with styling our views. And I'm going to break that down in detail, guys. So get excited for that. We'll see you in module 1. Thanks for watching this one. Peace out. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In our last video, we went over our project setup and how some of the ins and outs of Xcode work with things like the canvas, the preview, our editor, our project navigator, and all of that good stuff. So in this video, we are going to be getting started with how to add user interface components to our application. So we are going to be starting off with how to add text to our app. So we can already see an example of that here. We're adding some text. This particular screen is also adding an image. We're going to start with this text component. So what I want us to do is go over to our project navigator, and we are going to create a new folder here, guys. We're going to organize all of these modules into different folders to keep our project navigator really neat and organized. So you can right click on that and select new group. And you guys are going to notice that creates a folder for you. And we're just going to call this guy text. And then within text, we are going to create a new file. So to do that, you can once again right click on that and hit new file. Or the shortcut that I typically do is just hit Command N. And you do that with that particular folder highlighted. And guys, here we are going to select a SwiftUI view. And then we're going to hit next, and we're going to call this text module. And you guys will notice that it creates this text module for me. It has some boilerplate code. So it just starts this off with the text component, which we're going to be using, and it defaults it to hello world. And then it also automatically generates the preview for me. If you guys are taking this and iOS 17 has launched, which is coming pretty soon, I think it's coming within the next couple of weeks, your preview will look different. That's okay. Don't really worry about it. And at some point in this module or this course, I'm sure I will update to the new Xcode 15 and iOS 17 stuff. But anyway, guys, let's now start going over how we can customize this text and add our own text and stuff. So really quickly, let's just go ahead and delete this and type it out ourselves. So you guys will see that if we type out text, it comes up in our autocomplete window. And we have a couple different options, right, that we can select here to display text in our application. But really quickly, I just want us to take a look at what this description says. A view that displays one or more lines of read-only text. So this is like a label, right? So as we can see here, it just says hello world. So you open that up, and then you pass in a string. So we can go here and say hello bootcamp, right? And you guys will notice that that updates in real time on the preview, as we discussed in the last video. So that's really cool, right? So pretty simple, but how do we customize this stuff? So we are going to be doing that with the use of something called view modifiers. So in SwiftUI, guys, modifiers are a fundamental concept used to modify and customize the appearance and behavior of views. So to start this off, let's see if we can modify the font of this. So go ahead and go to a new line, and you're going to say dot font. And you guys will see here that this sets the default font for the text in the view. And then SwiftUI gives us a bunch of preset fonts, which is really nice. We can say dot large title. And you guys will notice that instantly my text becomes much bigger, right? So this is what's known as a view modifier. And this particular modifier is unique to text components. But let me just talk more about what this is, guys. So essentially, SwiftUI is a declarative framework, right? And it relies heavily on these modifiers, or this thing we just applied, to style and customize our views. So we can chain modifiers together, as we'll see here in a second. And this allows us to apply various transformations, such as changing the color, font, alignment, layout, or even animations to a view or group of views. So let's go ahead and continue on with some of these modifiers, guys. So I can change the color of my text. I can say dot foreground color. And once again, we get a bunch of preset colors, and I could say .blue. And you guys will notice that that changes my text to this nice blue color. And then I could, also say maybe .font weight. And this will allow me to apply a particular weight to my font. I could say .heavy, and that will give it this really heavy, bold look. I could say .light, and that will give it that really light sort of look right there. I could also say .semi-bold. There's a bunch of preset sort of font weights that we get from SwiftUI as well. So this is just giving you guys an idea of how we can customize our view with these view modifiers, right? We can chain them together in any order that we want most of the time, and it will apply those stylings or those customizations to the view that we are applying these modifiers to, right? So like I said, modifiers can be combined in any order. So I could take this guy, cut it, put it right there, and it has the same effect, right? So this is the foundation and the core of how we are going to be building user interfaces and customizing our views, guys. I'm just going to go ahead and show you a couple more text modifiers that we can introduce just so we can get a feel for how this stuff works and have some fun with it. So let's imagine if we made this text longer, right? So like, hello Bootcamp, this is the best bootcamp for Swift UI in the world, right? Hope you guys are having fun with me here. And guys, let's see how we can apply some different stylings to this, right? Let's go ahead and change the font to maybe like sub-headline. And that's going to make it a lot smaller, right? And then maybe let's go and see what we would want this to look like if we want to center our text here. So we notice right now that our text is aligned to the leading edge when it goes onto more than one line. We have this other really cool property called multi-line text alignment, and we could say .leading, right? And that's what it defaults to. We could also say center, and you guys will notice that when it goes to a new line, it centers that. And then we could also say .trailing, right? So that's pretty cool. And another thing we can do, guys, is we can italicize our text. We can underline our text and all of that good stuff, right? So this just gives you guys an idea of how you can mess around with your SwiftUI views and chain all of these view modifiers together to style and customize your view component. So that's really going to wrap it up for this text module, guys. I don't want to drag this on too long. I think that's pretty self-explanatory for now. In the next one, we are going to be moving on to shapes with SwiftUI. So how we can create shapes like circles, rectangles, and all of that good stuff, and what we use that stuff for. So hope you guys are having fun with this. We can see just how powerful SwiftUI is and how easy it is to build and customize user interfaces. And we're going to keep going and see how fun and amazing this new framework from Apple really is. So get excited for that, guys. We'll see you there. Peace. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In our last video, we went over how to create a text component and how to apply modifiers to that text component to customize it. In this video, we are going to get started with how to create shapes in SwiftUI. So examples of those might be circles, rectangles, things of that nature. And we'll explain what they're used for and show you some examples in some real-life mobile apps. So guys, let's go ahead and create a new folder in our SwiftUI Bootcamp guy. So you can go in here and hit Command Option N to create a new group. Alternatively, you could right click and hit New Group. And we are going to call this Shapes. And I'm going to keep this in sort of order. So you can drag and drop this folder above that one. And then we can go ahead and hit Command N to create a new file, SwiftUI View, and call this Shapes module, guys. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. So basically, guys, a quick overview is that shapes are a fundamental building block for creating and drawing graphical elements within your user interface. So they're used to define and draw various geometric figures and lines, such as circles, rectangles, capsules, things of that nature. So really quickly, before we get started, I want to show you guys some examples of shapes in real-life applications, and then we'll go over how to create some of them and customize them in SwiftUI. So really quickly, guys, I have this threads clone that I have built. We have a course for this on my website as well. Check out the SwiftUI Threads Pro tutorial if you want to learn how to build this. That's going to come after you get through this bootcamp though. But let me show you guys some real life examples of shapes in a real life mobile app. So you guys can see here that each profile image for these threads has a circular shape, right? So that's a clear example of a shape that we're going to be using in SwiftUI. So take an image and give it this like circular clip shape, right? And an example of when you might use something like a rectangle is here. So in the activity section, we have these two buttons up at the top, and they are these nice like rounded rectangles, right? So that's another example of a shape. Another example of a shape is here with this following button that you see. And honestly, guys, shapes are everywhere in applications, and it's very important to understand how to use them, create, and customize them as well. So let's go ahead and get started with our application and how we can create some custom shapes. So let's go ahead and delete this text guy, and we can start this off by creating a circle. And if you guys just go ahead and open up two parentheses, this is what's known as a constructor. It's just going to go ahead and create a circle for you. And it's literally that easy to create a circle or a shape in SwiftUI, guys. So there's a couple pre-built-in shapes in the SwiftUI libraries, and a circle is one of them. So we can go here and we can say .fill as a modifier and say like .purple. And it will change the fill of that shape. So you guys remember we use .foreground color for our text component. Shapes also have a fill modifier, so you can fill them with a color, but you could also, let's comment this out, .foreground color, maybe say .pink. You can also apply a foreground color. So don't really worry too much about the difference between these two things. Just know that these are two different options you have for applying a color to a shape. Another thing we can do, guys, is apply a stroke to a shape. So this is pretty cool. Go here and say line width. Oops, we have to do this before. So go on the circle here and say .stroke and select this line width option and maybe say 4. And you guys will notice that that sort of hollows out the circle and gives it this line, this stroke or line width of 4 pixels. 24 maybe. You guys will notice it gives it that like much thicker stroke line. So that's just another example of how you can customize your shape here, guys. And let's go over how we can change the size of this. So a modifier that almost every single view in SwiftUI has is a frame modifier. So this is how we can adjust the size of our view component, in this case our circle. And you guys notice here that we have 3 options: width, height, and alignment, but they're all sort of like grayed out, right? So if you want to select certain ones, just go ahead and start typing out width. So, and then that's going to add the width component for us. And then you can also start typing out height, and that's going to add the height component for us, and hit enter. And that's just a really nice like autocomplete trick to help you out with which parameters you want to include in the autocomplete. And let's just make it like 100 by 100, right? And you guys notice that that changes the size of my circle. I could make it 200 by 200, and it will just make it bigger, right? And then we could delete this stroke guy, and we'll notice that once our preview finishes rendering out, that it's just going to be a filled out circle with a frame of 200 by 200 pixels. So that's just a quick example of a shape, guys. Let me go ahead and show you some of the other shapes that we have available to us. So I'm going to comment out all of this stuff, just like that. Now let's go ahead and create a new shape. We can create a rectangle, which is another shape that SwiftUI gives us for free. And you guys will notice that that fills out the width of the entire screen, right, by default. And if I say like .fill, .blue, this will give you guys an idea of how you can like change the background color of your screen, right? But this is really just a rectangle shape. And I could also give this guy a frame. And you guys notice that if I just select frame without typing out width or height, it just gives me this like blank constructor. And then I could go here and add them manually. So I could say width 200, height 100. And that will change the frame of my rectangle as we might expect, right? Another really cool modifier that we have, guys, on shapes is a corner radius. So if I say corner radius and then say maybe 10, you guys will notice that it rounds out the edges of my shape. And that's very similar to what we saw in our threads application, right? Where we see that here we have this sort of rounded rectangle. Here we also have this rounded rectangle here, looking very similar to what we have here, right? And this is a common user interface practice that you'll see in applications. You typically always see rounded edges. It's more visually appealing and less sort of harsh than just the straight up pointy shape like we might see here. So that's another cool modifier there, guys. And let me just show you one more that SwiftUI gives us. We can have this capsule guy right here. And let's see what that looks like. So really not the most visually appealing thing, but let's go ahead and add some styling to it. We could say .fill is maybe .cayenne, and frame is width and height of maybe 200 by 64. And you guys will notice this sort of capsule shape, right? And that's probably something that you guys have seen in applications as well. You might see a button that has this sort of shape to it. So that's just a really quick tutorial on shapes and how we can customize them, guys. And that's something that we're going to be using quite often when we build out user interfaces for applications in the future. So a lot of this stuff is just going to be an introduction into these concepts like text and shapes and stuff. The really fun stuff is going to come when we actually start applying these practices when building out mobile applications, guys. So all of this is really just meant to be an introduction as to how this stuff works and how to use SwiftUI in general. As the modules go on, we're going to get more and more practice with this stuff and build out complex user interfaces using all of these basic fundamentals. So get excited for that, guys. In the next one, we are going to be going over how to add images to our app, which is going to be super exciting. So we'll see you there. Peace out. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In our last video, we went over how to build shapes with SwiftUI. In this video, we're going to be going over how to add images to our applications in SwiftUI. So really quickly, guys, I want to clean up our directory just a little bit. Let's go ahead and create two folders to put these two files in. So we're going to go ahead and hit Command-Shift-N twice. Let's actually do it 3 times because we also need a folder for today's module. So I'm going to call this first one app, so app, and then we're just going to take this guy and put this up there. And then this one I'm going to call root, and we're going to put our content view up here. And this is just so that we can easily go to our root folder and modify the root view of our application. And then this third guy here is going to be our images module. And I'm going to put this right below shapes. So let's go ahead and go to our images folder, guys, and create a new file, SwiftUI view, and we're going to call this images module. So I'm just going to get straight to it. Very similar to how we can create a text component, we can also create an image component. So if we go and just replace this with image, and you guys open up a parenthesis, you're going to see a couple different initialization options. We're going to be starting off with this one called system name, guys. So we can pass in a simple string. So I'm going to do, for example, heart. And you guys will notice that a heart image shows up there. I can also say something like heart.fill, and a filled in heart will show up there. So you guys may be asking, where do these images come from? Well, these are a bunch of stock images that we get from Xcode, and we can see all of those images in an app called SF Symbols, guys. So if you go to Google and type in SF Symbols and click on this first link on the Apple developer page, you guys will notice that there is this app here that lists a bunch of all of the images that we get access to right out of the box with Xcode. And they are constantly improving this application here. You get like animations with these images now, and a lot of them are just so cool. And I'm going to show you guys what the app looks like as well. So I'm going to pull the app up here, and this just gives you this big sort of database of all the images we get access to. So you guys will notice there's a bunch of categories on the right, and you can search for anything. So for example, the one we just did was heart and heart.fill. So then you can say heart.circle, heart.square, all of that good stuff. So you guys can play around with this a little bit. But the big takeaway here is that this is how we access those images. We have to use this system name constructor or initialization for our image, and then we just pass in a string. So I could also say heart.square, and you guys will notice that it shows up with a little heart inside of a square. And I could also say like heart.circle.fill, and it fills in the circle for me. So that's really, really cool. But anyway, guys, now I want us to go over how we can customize these images, okay? So first off, we get the standard stuff like foreground color on images as well. So I can modify this image to have any color that I want. So you guys will notice that turns it into like a pink circle. And I could also set a font attribute on an image, guys. So that's something unique to the system images, I believe. I can go here and say .font and then say like .large title. And you guys will notice it'll make that just a little bit bigger. And then I can further customize the scale of my image by setting .image scale to maybe .large, and it'll make it even bigger. And then I could also say .small, it'll make it smaller. And you know, that's pretty limiting. As you guys might imagine, we also get access to a frame on our image. So let me just go ahead and comment those out. And let's see what happens if I apply a frame to my image. So I could say width and height of maybe 100 by 100. And something interesting is that you guys will notice that nothing actually changes. So I want us to dive a little deeper into this. Guys, go into your canvas, and down at the bottom here, you'll see a play button and then this little mouse pointer with a square around it. Go ahead and hit that. And guys, you'll notice that this sort of highlights this view for us, right? So if I click like on this image, it'll highlight the box that or the frame of this image. So this is the actual size of the frame of this image. You guys notice that the image simply isn't filling out that frame. So I could change this to 200 by 200, and you guys will notice that box gets a lot bigger. But ideally what we would want is to have the image actually fill out the frame of this entire box. So to do that, guys, we have to add this modifier on the image called .resizable. So this is a modifier that specifies that, hey, this image is going to be able to resize to fit whatever frame that we specify on it, right? So if we say that, we'll notice that it fills out that entire box now. And whatever I change my frame to, the image will scale to fit that particular frame. You guys would have noticed that if I remove this frame, it's going to make it super, super massive because it's resizing to fit the entire screen now, right? So what we want to do here is just specify the frame and that we want that image to fill, and say .resizable so that it adjusts to that frame. And once again, guys, if I were to comment this out, the image would go back to its original size. So if you want it to fill the frame, you specify that you want it to be resizable. Okay. So that's really cool, right? That's a nice little introduction to how to add images to our application. But these are all system images, right? And these are pretty limited to like icons and stuff like that. So how do we add our own custom images to our application here? Well, what we're going to want to do is go to our assets folder. And this is where we can drag and drop actual files into our Xcode project, like images, colors, videos, and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to go and bring up my Finder, guys. And I have this folder where I have a bunch of Formula One drivers. And I am going to go and just highlight all of these from Finder and drag and drop them into my application. So now you guys will notice I have a bunch of images of F1 drivers inside of my app. Literally all you guys have to do is go and download some images from the internet or maybe from your device, get them onto your computer, and you can drag and drop them over into your assets folder. So now, guys, we can actually use those images inside of our project. So let me go ahead and comment this out right here and create another image. And we're just going to do a string as the initialization parameter for this guy. We're not going to use the system name property. Once again, this will pull images from the SF Symbols application or database of images. This is how we use our own custom images. So here, what I'm going to say is pass in Lewis-Hamilton. So we'll talk about the image sizing in a little bit, guys. I just want to make sure that we understand here that the image name you pass in has to match up directly with what it says in the assets folder. So you guys were to notice, if I were to like just even change this to a capital L with Lewis Hamilton, and I go back here, that nothing is going to show up, right? And that's because your app goes and looks for this image file name in the assets folder, and it says, hey, I can't find that. But if you guys were to change this back to capital L, everything would be good to go. So you just make sure that your image names match up exactly with what you have here. And if you guys want to rename them, you just highlight it and do a long mouse click on it. And when you let go, it'll allow you to rename the file. So guys, all of these properties apply to this image here as well. So we can say .resizable. And you guys will notice that changes the size of the image to fit the screen. So the reason it was all big and blown up before was because this is a really large image file. So before we stated that we wanted it to be resizable, it was using the natural size of the image. That could be, this image might be for an iPad or for a super large computer screen or for a TV screen. It's a really large image file in this case. Some images are large, some are small. In this case, this one was really large. So we need to say resizable so that it will stretch to fit the particular frame that it exists within, right? And then the same way I did up here, I can specify the frame of this image. So we can go here and just copy and paste that line of code for our frame. And you guys will notice that this will shrink my image down to a 100 by 100 image. So, you can mess around with the frame here, say 300 by 200, stuff like that, right? And you guys will notice that it's like slightly off in terms of its aspect ratio, right? So anytime you modify the image to have a frame that doesn't line up with its original aspect sizing or its aspect ratio, it's going to make the image look a little bit weird, right? So what we can do to solve that, guys, is before the frame modifier, we can say .scaled to fit or scale to fill. So let's say scale to fill. And you guys will notice that it resizes my image to fit the or fill the original aspect ratio or size, right? But it expanded beyond my frame. So if we go back and select this guy right here, we can see that the frame of my image is this box right here. But because we said scale to fill, it readjusted the image to fit its original aspect ratio and caused it to bleed outside of our frame bounds. So alternatively, you could say scale to fit, and it will sort of structure your image to fit the original aspect ratio and fit it within that frame. But you guys notice that it doesn't fill out the entire frame. So there's a lot of different ways you can play around with images here, guys. And once again, this is just an introduction to this stuff. But let me show you how to make the image have that nice filled ratio and clip it to that particular frame size. So underneath the dot frame, you can say dot clipped, and it's going to clip the image to fit the size of that frame, which is really cool, right? So that's how you can solve that issue there. And guys, in this situation, the order of our modifiers is important. So for example, if I went and removed this guy and maybe said clipped here, let's see what that does. You guys notice that it doesn't do anything, right? And that's because we need to specify the frame first and then clip it after that frame has been set. So if I go here and say clipped, then that will take effect. But we'll go more into detail on the ordering of modifiers a little bit later. I don't want to bog you guys down with too much stuff. That can get a little confusing. We'll get more practice with that a little bit later on in the course. Something else I want to cover really quickly is clip shapes. So just the same way we can say dot clipped, I can give this a clip shape of a circle. And you guys will notice that this gives me this really awesome, like sort of circular image here. And if I adjust my circle to have even dimensions, then everything looks just fine, right? This was a little off because we had a longer width than we did height. So that was causing some of the aspect ratio stuff to get thrown off. But, with the circle, with a perfect circle, you need the width and height to be the same every time. So now the image looks just fine, right? And we could even remove this scale to fill guy now and nothing will change, right? Because everything fits the frame as it should based on the image's original aspect ratio. So that's just a quick tutorial on images, guys. I know that was a lot of information, and you guys can play around with, some of the aspect ratio and the resizing and all that stuff as you see fit. I'm going to keep reiterating the fact that all of this that we're doing is just meant to be an introduction into these concepts. Like right now, you guys know how to put an image on a screen, which was the goal of this video. And we can apply some customization to it with like the foreground colors and the frames and the clip shapes and all that stuff, which gives us enough to potentially do something like this with this like Threads app, right? Where you guys would now know how to do something like this, apply an image and then give it a clip shape and apply a frame to that image, right? So this is like really small. So for example, to get it to look more like that, we could maybe make this like 80 by 80. And that gives you guys more of an accurate representation of how that might look in an actual application. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. In the next one, we are going to be getting into a much more exciting tutorial with the use of stacks in SwiftUI. One of the most important fundamental concepts for building user interfaces with SwiftUI is stacks, and that's what we're going to be covering in the next module. So get excited for that. We will see you there. Peace. Hey, I hope you guys are enjoying the bootcamp so far. If you are, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to keep seeing content like this. And if you guys want to continue learning with me and elevate your skills as an iOS developer and go pro, make sure you check out my website at stephancodes.com. So guys, here we have the option to continue learning with a bunch of amazing pro courses, which we can see here in the courses page. So we have the full version of this SwiftUI Bootcamp, and then we have a bunch of amazing clone courses like SwiftUI Threads, Instagram, Messenger, Uber, and then we also have some other fundamental stuff like programming fundamentals with Swift and a Swift networking masterclass. So there's so much material on the website, guys, for you to continue learning and elevating your skills as an iOS developer. And if you guys are serious about making a career change, or you really want to go pro or learn how to build apps at a high level, I highly advise you to become a member. So you can invest in a better you for less than a coffee a day. So guys, you can go month to month, sign up annual and save some money, or get lifetime access here. And this membership includes unlimited access to all of the content on our website, unlimited support. You get certificates of completion for courses, GitHub access, you can cancel anytime. And it's really just an amazing value if you want to continue learning. And you guys can see here that our students are getting hired at top companies like this and tripling their salary and really changing their lives. So if you guys want to take your career to the next level with us, make sure you go ahead and check the website out at stephancodes.com. We also have a bunch of amazing app templates here that are just ready-made, out-of-the-box professional app templates like Instagram and Threads and stuff like that. So this is the source code for all of those projects. And yeah, guys, hope you're enjoying this bootcamp, and we're going to continue learning in the next module and hope to see you become a member on the website to really take your career and your skills to the next level. We'll see you there. Peace. Welcome back. In our last video, we went over how to add images to our application, both from the SF Symbols app, which is like a database of stock images that we get from Xcode, and also from our assets folder. So I added these two comments, which you guys could as well if you want to. I'm going to try to take more notes throughout this bootcamp just so you guys can have that for reference if you ever come back and look at this stuff. So I added this note here that images from SF Symbols use image with the system name constructor, and then the images from our assets folder, we just pass in a string that matches up with the name of the image in our assets folder. So in this video, guys, we are going to be getting started with stacks. So let's go ahead and create a new folder in our SwiftUI Bootcamp directory by Command-Shift-N, and we are going to say stacks, and we're going to move this guy down to the bottom. And we are going to create a new SwiftUI view, and we're going to call this stacks module, same as always. So the best way for me to show you guys what a stack is to just go ahead and show you what it looks like in the code, and then we can sort of break it down further. So imagine that we wanted to add another text below this text, or a shape below that text, or an image below that text, right? How would we do that? Well, you guys might think, okay, well, maybe I could just go here and say like text hello bootcamp, right? And you guys will notice that nothing shows up, but if you look at the top of your canvas here, you notice that it creates an entirely separate preview that has the text for Hello Bootcamp. So that's not what we want, right? We want these two things to be together on the same screen, And to accomplish that, we're going to use a stack. So guys, go ahead and highlight this stuff and hit Command X to cut it. And then you're going to create something called a VStack. And just take a look at the autocomplete window. You're going to see it's a view that arranges its subviews in a vertical line. So we can think of this VStack as a container. And anything we place inside of this VStack, like these two text components, will be contained within that stack, and they will be stacked in a vertical line, right? So we can see here that these two things are now stacked on top of each other. So that's pretty cool. And it's so simple to get views stacked in this orientation by using something like a VStack, right? And you guys can put any combination of view components on within this stack that you want. So for example, I could go here and create a rectangle dot fill, say it's like pink or orange maybe, and then we can say dot frame width and height of maybe 200 by 100. And you guys will notice that that rectangle shows up right underneath my text component. And it's important to note here, guys, that things at the top of the stack container show up first, or show up at the top, and then everything that you place below it shows up beneath that thing. So if I were to take this rectangle and put it above my text component, it would automatically rearrange my view so that the rectangle shows up on top of the text. So these, the way that we see things in the code in terms of the order that they appear, or mimic how they will actually appear on screen in terms of where they get stacked in the order of the vertical stack. So let's just go ahead and dive into a couple different types of stacks here, guys. So let me go ahead and just make this like my rectangle and maybe give this a different color. Let's do pink and blue for fun. And then let's maybe give them a corner radius on each one of 10. So that's a vertical stack right there. So how would we want to stack things maybe next to each other, right? In terms, maybe horizontally. Well, you guys could go ahead and copy these two things. And let's go ahead and comment this out. And let's make an H stack. And you guys will notice that it stacks those things horizontally or next to each other. And we could adjust the frame of this. Let's maybe make these guys squares, right? And we can see here that they show up right next to each other, which is super cool. So SwiftUI makes it really easy to arrange things, guys. And we can also nest stacks within each other. So I can, for example, put H stacks inside of V stacks and vice versa. But there is one more type of stack that I want to show you guys before we move forward. So let's just go ahead and copy all this code, comment it out, and let's go ahead and make this a Z stack. So before we do, let's go ahead and read the documentation for this. So this is a view that overlays its subviews, aligning them in both axes. So that's just a fancy way of saying this is a stack that we can use to put things physically on top of each other. So V stacks and H stacks work within sort of a two-dimensional coordinate space. You can imagine a Z stack as being a three-dimensional coordinate space where we can sort of stack things on top of each other. Now, it's not actually going to be 3D. It's all going to fit within the plane of the two-dimensional phone screen, but you can sort of imagine that as your third dimension. So you guys will notice that right now, we can't really tell that things are stacked on top of each other, right? And that's actually because this blue rectangle is just covering this pink rectangle. So if I wanted to make this guy, let's say 200 by 200, you'll notice something interesting, right? That this rectangle in pink is on the bottom of the stack, and then this rectangle in blue is placed on top of that. So that's how Z stacks work, guys. They place things or overlay things on top of each other. And the way they work in terms of the order that things are placed within the stack is that the things that show up at the top are the sort of base elements, and then everything that you put after that will get stacked on top of the previous thing. So another example I could do here is making another rectangle, and let's make this one purple, and then maybe make it like 50 by 50. And you guys will see that that gets stacked on top of the blue, which is on top of the pink, right? So you guys can get a feel for sort of the order of things there. So we could add some notes here if you want, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I do want to show you guys a couple different properties of stacks now and sort of how we can customize these things. So let's comment this out and let's go ahead and go back to our VStack here, guys, and comment that back in. So we have our vertically stacked list of components here. And once again, the things that show up on top of the VStack show up first, and then everything gets put below that. And I forgot to mention, guys, with the H stack, everything that shows up at the top, we move from left to right. So everything that is put in the beginning of the stack starts at the left, and then everything that is placed below that in the code starts to be placed to the right of that previous element. So that's a really basic introduction to stacks. Now, like I said, let's go ahead and go over how we can customize them a little bit more. So guys, how do we space out the or increase or decrease the spacing between our two elements? You guys can see here that we have this sort of default spacing. It looks like it's about 4 pixels. So I can open up some parentheses on my VStack and you'll see a couple different options here. So let's look at spacing. And I could say like 32. And go ahead and just tab over to content, guys. You can literally hit the tab key and just delete that. We already have our content here. This is the content of the stack. And you guys will notice it increases the spacing between my elements. And I could keep playing with this. I could say 64. I could say 128. I could even say like -32. And it will start to overlap those things, right? Sort of in like that cool like card stack. Maybe you say -64. And you guys sort of get the idea. This is how we control spacing between elements. And guys, if this were to be applied, let me just go ahead and make that like 24 or something. Let me comment this out and go back here to my H stack. We can do the same thing on our H stack, right? So I can say spacing, and I could say like 32. And as you guys might imagine, it will space those elements out from, with the space in between them just like that. And once again, you can increase or decrease that spacing and say even like -32, and it'll sort of put those things on top of each other, right? So it's very rare you use negative spacing. I'm just showing you guys that for like purposes of testing here. And the next thing I want to talk about with stacks and how we can further customize them is how we can align the elements within our stack container. So you guys will notice right now that everything is really just nice and centered on our screen, right? So I want us to go ahead and let's maybe add one more rectangle here, and let's adjust the height of each one. We're going to create something that sort of simulates a bar graph here. So let's maybe make this guy purple. And let's go ahead and change the height of each one, guys. So let's make the height like 400, 200, and 100, right? So you guys notice that if I look at the overall frame of my stack, everything is sort of centered on the vertical axis, right? So what if I wanted to shove all these things down to the bottom? How would I do that? How would I align my stack components to the bottom edge? So with an H stack and with both H stacks, V stacks, and Z stacks, we have an alignment property that we can add to the constructor of the stack. So go ahead and add this alignment guy right here and add a comma before spacing, and make sure you guys add this alignment property before spacing, and go ahead and say dot bottom. And you guys will notice that it moves everything to the bottom edge of the frame here, right? And something really cool about SwiftUI, guys, is that you guys will notice that this frame is automatically or implicitly defined for us based on the height of the elements or the size of the elements within the container. So we don't have to specifically define a frame for this. We can if we want, but if we don't, SwiftUI automatically figures out that frame for us, as you guys can see here with this box, right? This represents my H stack here. And now I've moved everything to the bottom edge. So guys, H stacks have this vertical alignment property, and we can also align it to the top. But you guys will notice that our alignment has to be a vertical alignment in an H stack. So I can't move everything over to the right or the left because it's defined as a horizontal stack. And with a V stack, sort of the opposite of that is that with a V stack, we can only align things on a horizontal axis or horizontal alignment, which we'll see in a second. So let me take that back to bottom, keep our bar graph there looking pretty cool. And let me comment this out and comment this VStack guy back in. And let's maybe expand the width of this guy right here. Make it like 400, or like, let's do like 360 maybe. So we have some spacing on the edge. So guys, now let's go ahead and highlight that VStack and see what our frame looks like, right? So this is the frame of our VStack. So you guys will notice that I can't align things to the top or bottom, right? Because a VStack has different alignment properties and it's already vertically stacked, right? So it wouldn't make sense for me to say, hey, align this to the bottom or the top. It's a vertically stacked sequence of view components here. So that wouldn't make sense. So now what we can do is add our alignment, and you guys will notice we have a different set of alignment properties. We can say like dot leading, and that will move that over to the leading edge. We can also have dot trailing, and that will move it over to the trailing edge. And then we also have maybe center, but it defaults to center. So you almost never have to specify that. So that's just a tip for alignment, guys. And ZStack has alignment properties as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So let's go ahead and comment this back in. And guys, we can say on our ZStack, you notice that on the ZStack, we can align on any axis. You guys see here that we're not limited to a vertical or horizontal alignment, right? And that's because of the nature of VStacks. And for example, I can say dot top leading, and it'll move everything to the top leading edge. Or I could say bottom leading, and it'll move it all there. Bottom trailing. I think you guys get the idea, right? And that's just, how we can apply some different alignment properties to a ZStack. The next thing I want us to cover before we end this video and move on to part 2 of our stacks, guys, where we're going to be actually building out like sort of a user interface that's very similar to this. We're going to be building out like an interface like this using stacks in the next video. I want us to go over how we can nest stacks within each other. So let me comment this out really quickly. And let's go back up to our H stack and comment it back in. Let's imagine that we wanted to add like a label to each one of these like bars here, right? So what I can do is within my H stack, right? So I want some text showing up beneath each thing. So if I want it showing up beneath each one of these bars, I know that that has to be a vertical stack, right? So what I can do is place each one of these rectangles inside of its own vertical stack. So let's go ahead and do that. Cut VStack, cut VStack and paste. And then I can add text, right? Let's see here, like let's do revenue or something. And then we can copy and paste this. Text, revenue, text. And then maybe this could be profit. And then, maybe this could be, I don't know, margins, something like that, right? This is really just to show you guys how we can nest stacks. So what is going on here? We have this overall container where everything is horizontally stacked. But within that, each one of the components within this stack is a vertical stack where we have a bar and a text component, bar and a text component, bar and a text component, right? So I know that can be slightly confusing, and especially if you're new to SwiftUI. But the more practice you get with building out user interfaces and just playing around with this stuff on your own, guys, it really becomes second nature. And we're going to get a ton, and I mean a ton of practice with building user interfaces in this bootcamp. So if that's confusing to you right now, don't worry. We're just going to do a couple more examples of how we can nest stacks with our other stacks, our VStack and our ZStack. So let me comment that out, and let's go up here. Guys, and let's imagine that we wanted to place text inside of this guy, right? So let's imagine we want to keep this vertical layout right here, right, as the sort of parent container. And then we want to place something like right here maybe in the center of that. So we want this to be a ZStack and this to be a ZStack because we want to place things on top of each other, right? So what I can do is go ahead and wrap this rectangle in a ZStack. And then I could say text hello world, and then I can say dot foreground color of dot white dot font maybe dot headline, right? And that's sort of like what a button would look like maybe. And we could change the height to say like 50. And you guys notice that that is like exactly how a button might look in like a real life application, right? And then we could do the same thing for this guy here, rectangle. But let's imagine we just wanted to place something maybe next to the rectangle. So let's maybe wrap this in an H stack. And maybe create another rectangle. And you guys notice that looks super ugly. Maybe let's make it like green. And let's do 100 by 100 and then 200 by 100. So this is all still within a vertical stack, guys. But we can see here that we now have a Z stack inside of that and an H stack inside of that as well. So overall, we have things stacked on top of each other, but then within that, we have nested stacks. So make sure you guys take some time to try to wrap your head around that and maybe try to get some practice of your own by playing around with it a little bit. But that's just an introduction to stacks really quickly, guys. And in the next video, we're going to get some more practice by building out a user interface that looks really similar to this. So we're going to build like out each one of these cells, and it's not going to have the following button or anything, but we are going to have these images and the username and name of the person, and then these dividers as well. So that's what we're going to be building out as a challenge in the next video to finish up our stacks module before we move on to the next thing. So get excited for that. We will see you there. Peace. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In our last video, we went over an introduction to stacks with SwiftUI, vertical stacks, horizontal stacks, and Z stacks as well. And in this video, I want us to go through a challenge to see if we can apply some of that knowledge to build more of a real life user interface that you would see in a mobile application. So this is for the Threads clone that I've built. Once again, I have that course on my website. You can check it out. It's the SwiftUI Threads Pro tutorial. But I want us to see if we can build some of these like user cells that we see here. So our goal for this video is just going to be to build two of them stacked on top of each other. So we're going to have this circular profile image view, and next to it is going to be a username and a full name stacked on top of each other. So we're going to get a bunch of practice with things that we have learned thus far in this course. Literally everything we've done so far, right? We're going to be working with images, text, and stacks, clip shapes, and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. So guys, let's just go ahead and comment out this VStack we have here for all of our shapes and stuff. And I'm going to create another VStack. So why did I create a VStack here? Let's start with that. Well, I know that if you guys remember from the goal that we have, I want to build two of these cells and they are stacked on top of each other or vertically. So I know that the outermost like container for this view is going to be a vertical stack. I'm going to try to stack two cells. So let's go ahead and add some comments here. We're going to say cell 1 and underneath that cell 2. So I know that I need a vertical stack to put cell 1 and cell 2 on top of each other vertically. So what is this guy going to look like, right? Oops. So all this stuff here, guys, is going to be an H stack. Like the overall thing here isn't, we have things stacked next to each other on the horizontal axis. Like, so I have the profile image, and then next to that are these two text components. So I know that I want this to be an H stack. So I'm going to add some comments in here for what's going to go inside of this H stack. So it's going to be profile image, and then it's going to be, what's it called? Text name stuff, right? So the full name and the username. Okay, but this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So we notice that these two guys are stacked on top of each other. So within this H stack, this name stuff here is actually going to be a V stack. So let's go ahead and add that. So let's go ahead and start building this out now. So I know that I need an image. And let's do like Lewis Hamilton first. And obviously, guys, it's going to be massive. So we want to get this really small circular image right here. So if you guys remember, if we want to be able to resize this image, the first thing we have to do is add the .resizable modifier, right? So that shrinks it to a particular frame. Now that we've said resizable, we want to apply a frame to that image. So I want to say frame, and we'll do a width and height of maybe 64 by 64. So nice and small. And then, guys, we want this to be circular. So we can apply a clip shape of a circle. So that looks pretty good. We could make it a little smaller to match up with these designs. So maybe we could say like 56 by 56. Just make sure that the width and height are even dimensions, right? We want to make sure they equal each other. So that looks pretty good. And then next to that, we have our username and full name. So if we see here, Lewis Hamilton is Lewis.Hamilton. So let's make a text component for that. Lewis.Hamilton. And guys, we are going to want to make this bold, and we're going to want to make the font a little bit smaller, right? So let's go ahead and say font.subheadline. Font weight is semi-bold. So that looks really good, right? And then below that, but still next to this profile image, right? And that's what we have going on here. We have an H stack, and within that we have this image, and then next to it we have that vertically stacked list of components. We're going to say text, and we're going to type their full name. .font.subheadline. So really quickly, guys, something I want to touch on is what if this was one of these text components was much larger than the other? Like what if Lewis Hamilton's username was just Lewis, right? You guys will see here that this is aligned to the center for my stack, right? But we want this to be aligned to the leading edge. So if you guys remember how to do that on this V stack right here, right? Because this is what's in charge for these two components, we can see the frame, and we want to move Lewis over to the left-hand side. So to do that, we just open up our parentheses and say alignment is .leading. So this gives you guys a really good insight into how building UI works on a step-by-step level with SwiftUI, right? So we're attacking this step by step. We're outlining each one of our views. And now, guys, what I want us to do is sort of get the next item in the list. So what we could literally do is copy and paste this entire H stack that we have here, right? And to make this a little bit more clear of where we're at and what's going on, guys, go ahead and double click on that H stack bracket, the opening bracket, and that will find the closing bracket for you. If you hold down the command key and click on that bracket, you can just hit fold, and it will fold up all of that code for you. So it just makes this a lot neater. And that's a super, super cool feature that Xcode offers, right? And if you double click on it, it'll expand all of that stuff. But here we can just go and fold it. And now this gives us a much clearer understanding of what's going on, right? This is cell 1, and now I want to place cell 2 below that. So I just go here, paste all of that stuff in there, and boom, guess what? Lewis Hamilton shows up right there underneath that as well. And guys, I could keep pasting that, and it would show up as many times as I want to. So I'm just going to hit Command Z to undo that last paste. We said that we just wanted 2 items here, and this is looking really good. But you guys notice that there's one more thing going on, right? We have this dividing line between each one of our cells. So how do we get that? So what we're going to need to do, guys, is let me actually just go ahead and fold up cell 2 as well. What we can do, guys, is place dividers below each one of these things. So I can go here, and in between cell 1, I can put a divider. And after cell 2, I can put a divider as well. So this divider is a really handy component that we get from SwiftUI that just adds that sort of cell list divider in there for us, and it automatically spans the entire width of the screen, which is super, super nice. So that looks really good, guys. So the final piece of the puzzle that I want us to touch on is how we can actually get these sort of items here, like the user cell information, moved over to the left of the screen. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we add an alignment to the parent VStack. So I can say .leading, and you guys will notice that it's as simple as that to just get everything over to the leading edge. And I want you guys to pay attention to what happens if I remove those dividers. So you guys will notice that it's going to go back over to the center of the screen. And that's because the frame is defined by the width of the child views here, right? So we have these H stacks, and these H stacks only go this far. right? So this is our box. And if we say alignment leading, it just aligns it to the leading edge of the current box that it's within. But when I add a divider in there, guys, then that divider spans the entire width of the screen, and thus my SwiftUI frame automatically or implicitly expands the frame to fit that size because of the new view component that we've added. So because a divider automatically spans the entire width of the screen, my frame adjusts to be the entire width of the screen, so that when I say alignment is leading now, it will shove everything over to the edge of that frame. And let's go ahead and add this guy back there. So that's really important to understand there, guys. It's the implicit definition of frames that SwiftUI handles for us. So when we added the divider, it expanded the frame, and then the leading edge that or the leading alignment that we applied to our VStack then pushed everything over to the left of the screen. And similarly, guys, if I said trailing, it would go to the right side of the screen. And if I were to remove my divider, boom, boom, everything would just end back up in the center. So that's an important, like I said, concept to understand with SwiftUI. We'll get more practice with that stuff as we go, though. So don't worry. Let's change this back to leading. And last thing I want us to touch on, guys, is how we can apply some spacing, just like we have here in our user list here, onto our VStack. So this is something we haven't covered much yet, but we will be covering in a future module, the next one actually. We can go here and say .padding. And that will automatically apply padding around the edges of the overall VStack. And that is looking absolutely gorgeous right there, guys. So that is going to wrap it up for this video. I just wanted us to go through a challenge of what it is like to actually build out like a user interface that you would see in an actual mobile application, so you guys can apply the knowledge that you are currently learning and see how it's going to be used when you actually start building real life mobile apps. So in the next one, guys, now that we're done with stacks for now, we're going to be going over how we can work with this padding modifier in SwiftUI and all the ins and outs of that. So get excited. We'll see you there. Peace. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you're doing well. In our last video, we went through this challenge where we built out this user interface with like some user cells that we would see in something similar to like a social media application, right? So in this video, we are going to be covering something called padding. And we saw an example of that in the last video. And just to do a quick recap, guys, if I were to comment this padding guy out, or sorry, I deleted it. Let me just comment it out. You guys would notice that this hugs the edges of the phone screen, right? But then if I apply this padding, it literally just gives it some padding on the edges. And this padding guy is extremely useful in SwiftUI, and it's extremely common to create spacing between elements and around frames and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video. So let's go ahead and go up to our SwiftUI Bootcamp project folder and make a new group, and we're going to call this padding. And we are going to drag that down below stacks and create a new file called our padding module. So padding seems simple, guys, but there are some intricacies of it that are important to understand. And I also want to go over the differences between when to use padding and simply when to use spacing in your stacks. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video here. So let's go ahead and start this off by creating a VStack, guys. And then we can just say text, and we'll say like, hello world, how are you doing today? Okay, so I want us to just go ahead and apply some padding to this the same way we did in our last video, but I want us to pay attention to the frame of this text. So we can see here that the box surrounding our text, or the frame surrounding our text, is very tight to it, right? On all edges, the horizontal and the vertical edges. So if I were to go and apply some padding to this, and guys, just do it with the blank constructor, you guys will notice that when you type out padding and hit enter, it asks you for some edge insets. We're going to be covering that in a little bit. So you guys will now notice that my text looks the same, but now I have this padding around the frame, right? So really quickly, if I comment that out, you notice that the frame is hugging the text very tightly. And then if I apply padding to it, it expands my frame. So the padding has a default value of, I think, like 16 pixels, guys. You can pass in any number you want here. So for example, I could say padding of 4, and it will give me a padding of 4 pixels on all the edges, around all the edges of this frame, both leading, top and bottom, and trailing edges. And I could say 8, and it'll get a little bigger. I could say like 64, and it will get like massive. You know, it got so big there that it actually made the text go on to a new line. So let's actually just delete this really quickly here, guys. And I want to show you some detailed examples of how padding works and the importance of why we're getting so involved with this. So on this text property, I want you to go ahead and give this a background of .blue. So I believe this is the first time we're using this background guy. So this is different from the foreground color. If I were to say .foreground color here, it would make my text blue. But if I apply a background, it applies this background color to the current frame of this view component. And this gives us a really clear representation of the size of the frame of this text component right now. So what I want us to do after that, and make sure you do this after the background, is apply some padding. So you guys are going to notice that this blue background stays the same, but then the frame of the text component has now expanded. So this is where things get really interesting with SwiftUI. We notice here that the order in which we apply the modifiers here actually matters now. And this might seem confusing at first, but the more you play around with this stuff, guys, the more you get the hang of it. And we're going to get some practice with it here. So to show you what I mean by that, I want you to take this padding and put it before the background of blue. And you guys will notice that it applies padding and it expands the frame, and then we give it a background color of blue. But if I do things the other way around, I apply a background of blue to the current frame of the text, and then I apply some padding. So now I could actually go ahead and give this a different background color, let's say like .pink, and it will apply the pad or the background to the current size of the frame once we've applied this padding. So this can keep going, guys. You could say like .padding, .background, .green, right? And this just gives you a really clear example of how the order of modifiers that when we apply them can work. And this is very important to understand when you're building out your user interfaces. Like the main concept here being that when we apply this background, it applies it to the current frame of that view component at that particular time. And then we applied padding, and then we applied the background color of pink. And once again, this pink background gets applied to the size of the frame at that current time on line 17, which was this size right here. And then we applied more padding and then a background color of green, and then that was the size of the frame right there. So that's just a really interesting example. I'll just dial some of that back a little bit. Now I want us to go over how we can apply padding to different edges of a view component. So let's go ahead and make a text called horizontal padding. And we need that to be inside of the VStack. So really quickly, guys, let's go ahead and wrap all of this inside one big VStack. Just like that. Yep. Or what we could do is take this text and simply apply it to, or those modifiers and apply it to the text. And then we could pass this guy into that VStack. And then I think that will only make us need one VStack. Sorry, that was a little confusing, but at the end of all that, your code should look like this, right? We're inside of one VStack here, and we're just applying the modifiers to the text component instead of the stack itself. We'll do some modification to this VStack itself in a little bit. So let's go ahead here, guys, and say .padding, and then we're going to say .horizontal. And you guys will notice that it only applies padding on the horizontal edges of this text component. And then I'll go ahead and say .background, and I can say maybe .purple, right? So that is what the padding looks like on the horizontal edges right there. So if I were to remove that padding, the background only gets applied to the current size of the frame. But once I apply the horizontal padding, it expands on those horizontal edges. And if you guys want to apply a custom number of the horizontal padding, you can say like 32 at the end of it, and it will apply 32 pixels of padding on the horizontal edges, right? Horizontal meaning both left and right, guys. So then let's do another text component here and call it vertical padding. So we can do the same thing we did here. Let's just copy and paste that. But let's maybe make it blue. And instead of horizontal, we're going to say vertical. And you guys will notice that there is no horizontal padding on the horizontal or on the leading and trailing edge now. It's all on the vertical edges, right? So this gives us further customization with our padding. Dot vertical will apply it to the top and the bottom. So let me just make some comments. Left plus right. Top plus bottom. And padding here is all edges. Okay, so now we can take this or drill down even a step further. So let's say text leading padding. And let's go ahead and paste that. And we can say dot leading. And you guys will notice it only applies padding to the leading edge. And here I could say maybe pink. Cool. And this will just be left edge or leading edge. And we can do the same thing for trailing. Say trailing, and let's make this maybe yellow. And this is right edge or trailing edge, right? So I think you guys get the idea. We can do this on the top and bottom edges as well. So I'm going to say top, bottom, top, bottom. And I don't think we need these comments anymore. I think we get the idea, right? So let's see. Let's maybe make one of these purple and one of these like cayenne or something. Okay, guys, so on top, this guy right here, it applies padding to the top of the text component, and similar to bottom, it applies it on that bottom edge right there. So that's some really cool examples of how padding works and all of the intricacies of it, guys. And to finish this video, guys, I want us to head back to our stacks module and talk a little bit about how we use this padding modifier here. So the big thing to understand here is that we chose to put the padding on the VStack itself and not on each individual component within the VStack. And I want to show you guys what that would look like if we did it that way. So let's go ahead and comment out the padding that we have on the VStack, and we'll see here that it causes our cells to hug the edges of the screen, right? And if you guys were to select this HStack and go ahead and add padding to that, and add padding to the other one, it gives us a very different look, right? Like there's a lot more spacing on these edges here. So if you guys look at the frame of each one of these individual elements, we notice that it expands quite a bit, right? And that gives us a lot of spacing in between each one of our items. So the difference between doing that, and once again, let me just comment this out and comment this out, is that when we apply padding on the VStack itself, it doesn't give me any of that extra spacing. And that's because of the frame of this VStack, right? So if I comment it back in or back out and we look at this VStack itself, this VStack this is the box for this VStack or the frame for this VStack. So when I apply padding to the VStack itself, it's just going to give me padding on the overall VStack, not each element within that VStack, right? So that's kind of what we want there. And if we wanted more spacing between each individual item, then we could simply add our spacing parameter on our VStack here, right? That's a much cleaner implementation in my opinion, because when you guys are randomly adding padding to each one of the view components inside here, it's not super clean code, right? Because then every time you add a new element, you have to manually add padding to it. Whereas now if I were to add a new element, like copy and paste this guy, all of the spacing and stuff is already handled for me, right? So, and that's because I spaced out each element with my VStack like this, and then just apply padding to the edge of the end of the VStack or the VStack itself, as opposed to applying padding to each individual element, because then I'd have to go like this and do all that stuff every single time I added something new to it, right? So that just gives you guys an idea of how we can write cleaner code with SwiftUI and essentially how to write code that is easier to scale, right? So for example, what I mean by that is when I add this new element, I don't want to have to remember to apply padding to each individual element that I add to a stack. I want to just set my stack up so that it's already handled for me. And then I can just apply padding to the stack itself to get this desired look, right? So that's a much cleaner implementation, guys. And I want to reiterate to you that you don't have to get this stuff and be an expert on it right away. It's important to understand that this is going to take a lot of practice and a lot of time to get good at. There's definitely a learning curve with SwiftUIs. There's a lot of ins and outs and a lot of intricacies to how to build user interfaces. And there's not one right way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways of building UIs with SwiftUI. And this is my style. And you guys might develop your own style as you go. So it's important to understand that this is going to take time and patience, guys, to get good at, and we are going to get that throughout this module the more we build user interfaces. So the more these modules progress, the more complex the user interfaces are going to get, and the more we're going to use these foundational concepts that we're learning right now. So you guys are going to get tons of practice with this stuff as we go. That's going to wrap it up for this video. In the next one, we are going to be talking about something called spacers. So get excited for that, guys. We will see you there. Peace. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are having a great day. In our last video, we went over how to use padding with SwiftUI. In this video, we're going to be going over how to use spacers, which is a simple and powerful view that we can use to control the layout and the spacing of our elements within a container, such as an H stack or V stack. So let's go ahead and start this video out the same way we always do and create a new module, guys. So we're going to go and add a spacers module, and we're going to move that down below our padding guy. And we are going to hit new to create a new SwiftUI view and call it spacers module. So I like to learn by doing, guys. So I'm not going to do some super deep dive into the concepts or the principles behind spacers. I'm just going to show you guys what it looks like, and then we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and create a V stack here. And let's add a text called spacers module. And what I want you guys to do is add a spacer here. And let's take a look at what happens. So we notice that it automatically just shoves that view up to the top of the screen. So why exactly is that happening? What exactly is this spacer doing? Well, to get a more accurate representation of that, let's go ahead and add a frame to this and give it just a width, guys, of maybe 24 pixels and a background color of .red. So we'll see here that this spacer is an actual view component that is just filling all the empty space that is beneath this text, right? And then it spans to fit the entire height of the screen. So when we apply spacers in a VStack, it applies this spacing on the vertical axis of my view. So this spacer is literally just filling all of this empty space on the vertical axis of my screen, and it shoves it all the way to the top, right? So similarly, guys, if I were to place this spacer before the text component, it would do the same thing, but it would fill all the space above it and shove it all the way down to the bottom. And you guys can see here that I can place another piece of text above the spacer, and it will have the text right there, and then it'll fill all the empty space between those two things relative to the screen size. So spacers are really going to help us with creating responsive user interfaces, guys, because it's a tool that we can use to fill the entire width of a screen or height of a screen. So screen size it doesn't matter, right? Because if you build a good UI, it's going to be a responsive UI. So it doesn't matter if you build it for an iPhone Pro, an iPhone Pro Max, an iPad, an iPhone SE, none of that stuff. You want to use spacers to help you adapt to those different screen sizes. And this is just going to be an introduction into that. So that's going to, be all we need to take a look at for our VStacks. Now I want us to go ahead and comment this out, and let's see what it looks like with an H stack. So let's go ahead and add a text component here, and maybe just say horizontal, and then let's add a spacer after that, guys. So if you guys remember, our H stacks are aligned from left to right. So the thing that appears at the top starts on the left, and then everything else gets placed to the right of that. So very similar to what we saw with our V stack, it's just happening on a different axis here. So let's go ahead and do the same thing we did with our spacer. Let's give it a frame and a background. This time though, guys, we have to give this a height because of it's a horizontal spacer. So we're going to say 24 and .background is maybe .blue. So we have to give this a height now, whereas with the VStack, we had to give it a width because on a VStack, the height is dynamic, right? The height fills the entire width of the screen. So you can't specify a height for a spacer when it's on a VStack. And with an HStack, you can't specify a width because it spans to fit the entire width of the screen. So the width is kind of like infinity, right? So you can give it a height though, so that we can visualize it. So this is what's happening with our HStack, guys. It was placed to the right of our text component, and it just fills all that empty space and shoves it all the way over to the left of the screen. And I'm sure you guys could guess that if I did this the other way around, it would fill the empty space on the left side of that text component and shove it all the way to the right of the screen. So here we're getting a really, really comprehensive picture of how powerful spacers can be and how they can help us with not only building more dynamic layouts, but how they can help us with building layouts that are responsive to different screen sizes, right? So you guys can imagine that even if I change the orientation of the phone, let's see if I can do that. I'm not sure how to do that on the simulator or the preview, but if you guys were to flip the phone sideways and have a completely different layout in terms of your height of the screen and width of the screen, you're going to use spacers to help you adapt to that orientation of the device, right? And we'll get more practice with that type of stuff as we go throughout the module, guys. This is really just an introduction to spacers here. And another cool thing is that, let me go ahead and fix this and say text horizontal. You guys will notice that if I want to get things to span the entire width of the screen, much like we did with our VStack, we can use this spacer here to fill out the space between elements on the horizontal edges. So if I want to place something on the left side and then on the right side, I can use a spacer to help me do that, right? So what I want us to do, guys, is expand on our user list a little bit more that we built out in our challenge video. So if you guys remember in our stacks module, this is what it currently looks like. Let's imagine we wanted to put an action button over here to the right of this user cell. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste this into our spacers module. So let me comment that out and go here. And this is what we currently look like. So you guys notice that we're already inside of an HStack, right? Let me delete all this padding and stuff that we don't need. Now, like I said, let's imagine we wanted to add an action button here, maybe to send a message to this user or indicate whether or not we're following them, or have a follow action button, something like that. So if I were to just keep placing things next to this HStack right here, guys, right? Let's say I did an image, system name, paper plane dot circle dot fill dot foreground color dot blue, right? So you guys notice that it just shows up right next to my vertical stack with my name stuff. And you guys might think, okay, well, maybe I could just apply some horizontal padding and just hard code these numbers until I get it right? Well, this is an example of how, let's make that leading. This is how a noob would do things, right? So they would just keep adjusting this number, let's say 200 pixels, right? Until they got it to where they wanted to. And then they're like, oh man, it gets super frustrating because now this stuff is all janky and messed up, right? And this is not responsive to different screen sizes, right? This hard-coded value of 200 only works for this particular screen size. If I had a smaller width or a larger width, it wouldn't look right. So the solution to that is what we just covered with our spacers, guys. So instead of applying that ridiculous amount of padding or some ridiculous amount of hard-coded spacing on my HStack up here, I just apply a spacer. And it will automatically shove that all the way over to the right of the screen. And you guys can see here how this padding is coming in to save the day because the VStack itself has padding on it, right? So it has padding all around these edges here. So this guy doesn't get shoved all the way over to the right side of the screen and hug that edge. And you guys will notice that that's what would happen if I didn't have my padding on the V-stack there. So this really starts to bring all this stuff together, right? And goes to show you guys what it's like to build a clean, robust, responsive user interface using SwiftUI. And, you know, obviously, guys, we can just take this, copy and paste it, and put it on this H-stack right here. And that looks really good, right? So that's like a little action button, like if you were to want to maybe message that user. And to make this a little bit more dynamic, let's maybe like go ahead and add Checo and like Checo Perez, just to spruce this up a little bit, right? And the last thing I want us to do in this video, guys, is see if we can move this up to the top of the screen. So let's just clean up our code a little bit. Let's go ahead and fold some of this stuff. So let's fold that guy, right? So this is looking a lot cleaner now. Now let's try to think about what we would want to do, guys, if we want to move this to the top of the screen. Well, we got an example of that with how to do that with our vertical spacer stacks, right? Or our vertical spacers that exist within vertical stacks. So that's what we're going to want to do here. I want you guys to try to see if you can figure out where to place that spacer to accomplish moving this these two cells up to the top of the screen. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you guys can do that and come back when you're ready. Okay, so it's actually super simple, guys. You're just going to want to go within this V stack. And if you guys got that right, congrats. And go underneath that last divider and just go ahead and add a spacer there. And that will move that all the way up to the top of the screen. And similarly, if you were to add that to the top of the V stack, it would move all that stuff to the bottom of the screen, right? So that really gives you guys a good introduction to spacers and how they work and how they can help us customize our layouts even further and have more control over them, and also how we can utilize them to adapt to different screen sizes and fill empty spaces on our screen no matter what size the phone is. So that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. You are doing absolutely phenomenal so far. We've literally combined everything that we have learned thus far in this bootcamp to build this user interface that we see on the screen in front of us, guys. That's images and stacks and spacers and all of that good stuff, padding as well. So you guys are getting a really good foundation in how to build user interfaces with SwiftUI, and we're going to be continuing on with loops in the next module, guys. So get excited for that. We will see you there. Peace. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In this video, we are going to be covering loops with SwiftUI. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a new module. As always, we're going to just call this loops, move it down here, create a new Swift file or SwiftUI view, call it loops module. So if you guys haven't taken the fundamentals course, this is where things are going to start to get messy. If you don't understand the concept of a loop, guys, you need to stop what you're doing right now, go and take the fundamentals course, and then come back to this bootcamp. I'm not going to be explaining loops in detail here. I'm going to assume that you know what a loop is in programming, at least with some basic level of understanding, and that's what we're going to be covering in this module. So in SwiftUI, guys, we can leverage the use of loops for each loop specifically to help us create views. So this is a really awesome and powerful feature. So let me go over and show you what this is going to look like. So you're going to go ahead and say for each, and you're going to select this option that says data and content. So similar to a for loop, guys, we have to supply this loop with a range. And that's the amount of times this loop is going to run. So you guys might be able to see where this is going already. We can use this for each loop to help us create views repeatedly, very efficiently, and very fast, right? With very few lines of code. And we're going to see how we can leverage this to create super clean code with SwiftUI. So let's just go ahead and maybe say like 0 up to 100. And then on the content tab, you're going to hit enter. And it's going to open up a closure, and then you're going to get access to the integer that we are looping through in that guy right here. So this should all look pretty familiar if you've already taken the fundamentals course. And if you guys need a refresher, go back to the loops module and then come back to this here. So we can just say index in, and then I can just go here and say text hello index. And you guys are going to notice that we get an error, and this doesn't work just yet. So this is a concept that confuses a lot of people with loops and SwiftUI. I'm going to break it down for you guys. So after this 0 to 100 range, guys, we're going to say ID : /self. And then you guys will notice that everything is going to, we created 100 simulators. We actually need to put this inside of a VStack. That's my bad. Let's go ahead and say VStack, boom. And you guys will notice that we get a bunch of stuff showing up on the screen with just a few lines of code, right? So this leverages the power of loops to help us create view components. You guys can imagine that if I wanted to create exactly what I see here on screen, it would require that I write 100 lines of code and say hello 1, hello 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's just go ahead and maybe change this to 10 so that we can see everything showing up on screen here, guys. So loops in SwiftUI are absolutely amazing, and we're going to go over a couple more examples of how we can use them and leverage them to create really awesome user interfaces in a really concise and clean manner. So really quickly though, let me explain this ID /.self guy that we are seeing here. So basically guys, each view that gets created within this for each loop needs a particular ID assigned to it so that SwiftUI can distinguish between each view that exists within that particular stack. So you guys can imagine that if each one of these all had the same ID, SwiftUI wouldn't know which one is which or be able to distinguish one element from the next, and it would make your user interface impossible to render, or it would make it really messy, right? Because the way that SwiftUI renders views, if it can't tell things apart, it might have trouble rendering or creating those views. So I think this should be pretty self-explanatory if you guys understand what loops are at this point. So basically anything that we apply or add inside of this loop closure is going to get created for us by X amount of times or however many times this loop runs. So for example, I could go here and add another text component, loop ended, and it'll run through all of this stuff, create it, and then it will add, whatever shows up underneath that. And you guys could do the same thing for HStacks and VStacks and all that stuff, right? We don't need to get into that. What I do want us to do, however, is go over how we can create this user interface that we had over here a lot more efficiently by using a loop, right? So you guys will notice that we had a whole lot of copy and pasted code in our spacers module when we're creating this list, right? And we can use a loop to create this same exact user interface with significantly less code by leveraging the power of for each loops in SwiftUI. So what I want us to do, guys, is just go ahead and copy this HStack. Once again, let's go to our loops module and let's go ahead and paste that in there. And you guys will notice that, bam, we get 10 of those user cells showing up there beautifully. And guys, on this VStack right here, I can go ahead and add my padding and it'll make everything look nice and neat with all that spacing on the edges. So this is a whole lot less code to create this stuff 10 times, right? You guys can imagine how awful this would be if we had to paste this 10 times just to get the same effect. And that is not scalable in any way, shape, or form, right? You could imagine if this was an actual mobile application and you were fetching all of this data from, say, an API like with Instagram, you don't know how many users are going to get displayed, right? So you can't just copy and paste stuff like that because you don't know exactly how many people are going to come back. You need to use some sort of loop to loop through a data structure, which we're going to do here in a second, to render the exact amount of items that you need. So on that note, guys, let's go ahead and create like an array up here. And we're going to loop through this array, and that's going to allow us to create the proportionate amount of views based on a data structure. So right now we're just looping through a static range of indices or numbers. I want to show you guys what it looks like to loop through an actual data structure, very similar to what we saw in the Swift fundamentals course, right? we noticed that, yeah, we could use loops to help us do things repeatedly, very efficiently, but we could also use them to loop through data structures. So let's go ahead and create an array. And it's going to be a string array. And it's going to equal just a bunch of driver names. So we can say like Lewis Hamilton, Checo Perez, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, and maybe like Max Verstappen too. So now we have a data array, guys. So how do we modify this for each loop to loop through this array and maybe just display the driver name here? So what we could do is replace 0 to 10 with this drivers array. We do have to keep the ID \self guy because each one of our view components does need an ID, and we're basically just assigning the self to it. And we'll go over this concept in more detail and how we can avoid doing that in a future video. But now, guys, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So before we were looping through a range of numbers, and we named this property in the closure index, right? And in that case, it was representing a number. So in this case now, because we're looping through an array of strings, each item here in the closure is going to be a string. So you guys will notice here that I'm going to want to call this something like driver or name or something like that, right? I always like to name this parameter here that represents each item that I'm accessing at that particular iteration of the loop, something that makes sense. Like you don't just want to call this like X or something, because if you came back and looked at this code, you would have no idea what X was. It would take a little bit more digging, right? So let's call it driver. And then let's go here, guys. And in this text component, instead of just hard coding Lewis Hamilton, we can replace that with the driver name. And you guys will notice that a lot of the other data is the same, right? But now each one of our driver names is actually dynamic, right? So we are looping through this driver array, and we are looking at each one of the strings and dropping it into this text component here. So if you guys wanted this to be like, make a little bit more sense, just comment that stuff out, right? And then you could see here that, you know, that's what it's going to look like. And if you want to apply some spacing to each one of those guys, let's maybe do like 32. Oh, we can't do it there. We need to do it on the overall VStack, right? So let's say spacing 32. That looks a little bit better, right? So this should make more sense, guys. We are looping through this drivers array, and at each iteration, we have access to the particular driver that we are looking at. First, it's Lewis, then it's Checo, then it's Lando, then it's Charles, then it's Max, and then we are able to display that driver name there. We're going to go over how to make this list more dynamic and display like an individual profile image and unique username for each driver. But for now, this is all we are going to be doing with loops. So that just gives you guys an idea as to how awesome loops are with SwiftUI. Really helps us leverage the power of loops in general to help us create views. And we can loop through data structures the same way we saw with for loops to help us display things, right? And you guys will notice that I only get back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drivers because we are looping through this data structure here. The loop knows exactly when to start and when to end its execution. So as soon as I get to the end of my array, I stop and I exit this for each loop, and then I just go and render this next view here. So loops are great in SwiftUI. We use them all the time when we are working with displaying lists of data. So for example, guys, like we do that here in the threads clone, right? We loop through some array of users and we display all of those guys in a list. And also, we do the same thing with the home page on the threads clone, except here we're looping through an array of threads and displaying each individual thread. So loops are extremely common in SwiftUI. That gives you guys an awesome introduction to them. And that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. In the next one, we are going to be getting started with scroll views. So get excited for that, guys. We will see you there. Peace out. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In this module, we are going to be getting started with how to implement scroll views in SwiftUI. So just to give you guys a quick overview of what that is, I'm going to bring this threads clone back up here. And we can see here that on my home feed, as you might expect, this is a scrollable list of items. as is my user list. I can scroll through this list of items here, and same thing with like this activity list right here, right? So we're going to be going over how to implement this functionality with SwiftUI here. It's actually going to be really, really simple. And we're also going to be continuing our use with loops to help us do this. And it's going to be really, really fun, guys. So let me just show you what we're going to be building before we get started. We are going to build out this incredible looking Uber Eats style menu. So you guys might be shocked that you're going to be able to put something this beautiful together at this point in your development career, but SwiftUI makes it that easy. So we're going to be going over how to implement this inside of a scrollable list with scroll view. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. So as always, we're going to start this off by creating a new module. So we're going to say scroll views, drag that down, and create a new SwiftUI view, scroll views module. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it, guys. So I just want to go over how to implement a super basic scroll view to get started. And we're going to go over how to implement them both vertically and horizontally. So what I want us to do is go ahead and create a VStack and a for each loop. And let's loop through 0 to 100 and add our ID property, \self, index in. And then let's just add text, hello, index. So you guys can see here that this is really, really ugly, right? Like we are starting on our screen at 31 and it stops at 70, but we want to display hello 0 through 100, right? So if you actually look at the content of this, right, like the frame, you guys will see this expands far off the screen, right? So what we want to do is implement a scroll view here so all of this gets contained within the frame of the screen or the phone, and then we can scroll up and down to view all of the content. So to do that, guys, it is super, super simple. All you need to do is highlight this code, hit Command X to cut it, and add this scroll view, and then paste it in there. And guess what? Now we have this beautiful scrollable list. Just go ahead and hit play back on the simulator, or sorry, the preview here, and you guys will notice that I can scroll up and down now, which is absolutely incredible. SwiftUI makes it that easy to implement a scrollable list. So there's a couple things that we're going to want to adjust here, however, or some customization that I want to go over with you guys. So you'll notice that right now this is a vertically scrollable list and it has this indicator here. Well, there are going to be times where you want to show that indicator and where you might not want to show that indicator. So we can open up our parentheses here and we see a couple different input parameters, right? We already have our content, so don't worry about that. We want to use this guy that says shows indicator, and we can say false, and you guys will notice that now nothing is showing up on that with that scrolling indicator, right? So sometimes you guys might want that, you might not. It defaults to true. So if you want to disable that, you just have to add this input parameter to hide that indicator for your scrolling. And one more time, what it looks like with it, we can see that indicator right there, right? So, okay, guys, that is a vertically scrollable list. How do we introduce a horizontal scrollable list? So you might think that, hey, we just go here and make this an H stack, but that's not necessarily the case, right? So what we're going to have to do is actually modify the axis of the scroll view. So we can go here and say axis, or actually, guys, we can actually just say dot horizontal. And you guys will notice that I now have a horizontally scrollable list. So scroll views default to vertical on the axis, and then you typically just implement a VStack and some sort of loop to loop through a bunch of items to have your scrollable list there, right? If you want the horizontal axis, you just specify that in your input parameters here, and you make an H stack, and you can do the same exact thing. So here, we can maybe make like a rectangle dot frame width and height of maybe like 100 by 100, and let's just maybe get like 10 of them. And you guys can see here that I have this like sort of horizontally scrollable list. We could even have a little bit more fun with this and implement something like the stories user interface that you might see on Instagram or something, right? So let's see if we can just do that for funsies, guys. And then we will move on to building out this scrollable Uber Eats menu here. So let's create an array that we can loop through of all of our drivers. So we're going to loop through all of those driver images and then display them in like a horizontally scrollable list here. Something that is going to, like I said before, mimic like the stories feature on Instagram. So let's go and say, let driver images equal, and let's just go ahead and type this out. I'll kind of speed through this. Okay, so I have my driver images. You guys can use whatever set of images you like. And what we're going to do is loop through this driver images array. We'll say image in. And let's just go ahead and create an image, guys, with our image name. Say .resizable. And then we're going to say .frame width and height of, let's do like 64 by 64. .clip shape is a circle. And you guys will notice that it's that simple to put together a user interface that looks like super amazing, just like we see with the stories feature on something like Instagram, right? So really, really awesome functionality that SwiftUI gives us there, guys. They really make putting these user interfaces together so easy. And once you get the hang of this stuff, it's as easy as breathing. So now what I want us to do is move on to creating this awesome Uber Eats menu here. So this is going to be a scrollable list of like these menu items. So let's go ahead and get started with that, guys. So I have added these images in my assets folder that we're going to be using. We have like this Japanese tapas guy, pizza, ramen, steak, sushi, and burgers. So that's what we're going to be using for this, guys. You should have access to that in the completed source code file. And you guys can drag and drop this into your own project as well. And let's go ahead and get started with this. So I'm going to comment this whole thing out, and we're going to create a new scroll view. So we're just going to say scroll view, and just like that. So let me actually pull this image up for reference so that we can see what we're going to be building. So it's going to look like this. Let me just make it a little smaller. Okay, so we're going to have this featured on Uber Eats text first, and then our scrollable list, guys. So we're going to say text featured on Uber Eats. And then we're going to say .font is .title2. I know I didn't do a super deep dive into all the fonts, guys. So really quickly, you have title, title2, title3. Then you have like headline and subheadline. If you guys want to see more of the fonts that are available, you can hold down the command button and click on that title 3 guy and say jump to definition. And it will take you to like the actual SwiftUI code. And these are all of the fonts that you have available right here. Large title, title 2, headline, body, call out, footnote, and caption. And they are organized from largest to smallest here. So that's just a list of all the fonts you have available to you. So we're going to do title 2. We're going to say .font weight is .semi-bold. And we are going to give this some padding. So we want some padding all around this guy, as we can sort of see here, right? We have padding on the leading edge, on the top, and before we start our scroll view. Okay, so next up, guys, we are going to need our food image name. So I'm going to say let food images equal. And once again, just going to type this out super fast. It's going to be Japanese tapas. Okay, so those are all of our food images. So pretty similar to what we did here, guys. We're just going to create our for each loop. We're going to go through our food images, say ID \self. Food image in. And then we are going to start creating this item that we see here. So we're going to have this image, and then underneath it, we're going to have some information about the restaurant and the delivery time. So let's get started with the image, right? So we are going to just create an image here, and we have access to our image name. So we're going to say food image. Okay, and then we are going to say .resizable. We're going to say .scaled to fill. So we can already see this sort of coming together. we just need to adjust the frame. So then we're going to say dot frame width and height is 360 by 150. And then we need to say dot corner radius is 10. And that looks pretty good to me. So we have all of our images here and they look pretty good. So next up, guys, we want to add our text. So unfortunately, the text is going to be the same for each thing. Right now, we only have the ability or the knowledge to loop through one data structure. We are going to go over how to add dynamic data to each individual item in a future video. For now, the only thing that's going to vary between these list items is the food image. So we're just going to go here and we're going to say text shoto text $0.99 delivery 15 to 30 minutes. And we want the foreground color of that to be dot gray. And that looks pretty good. Okay. So there are some things we need to adjust, right? We definitely want the font size to be smaller here. Let me just make this bigger. Right, so this is the completed app. We want this one aligned to the leading edge. We want to bold the restaurant name, and then we want the font size to be a little bit smaller here. And then we're also going to want some spacing between each item. So let's see if we can do that. So here, let's go ahead and wrap this text, these two text components in its own VStack, guys. And then we are going to paste that in there. And we are going to go here and we're going to say we want the alignment to be dot leading. So that gets Shoto over to the leading edge of this VStack, right? So that's a cool trick there. Anytime you guys have vertically stacked things and you want them to have their own unique behavior, you can just create a substack, right? So we created a substack for just our two text components, which is its own VStack, and we set the alignment to leading. So only these things will be aligned to the leading edge here. So that looks good. And then, guys, a nice trick that you can do, instead of saying dot font, dot subheadline, dot font, dot subheadline in both places, right? Because that's the font that we want. What you can do is actually just extract that font guy and put it on the entire VStack. And what it'll do is it'll apply that font to each individual sub element or subcomponent in that particular stack. So we don't have to put that in multiple places, which is really, really nice. The only thing we want to do is bold Shoto. So we're going to say dot font weight, dot semi-bold for the restaurant name. And that looks pretty good. So you guys will notice that while we accomplished getting Shoto over to the left side of this VStack, it's still not all the way aligned to this leading edge here of our overall like menu item, right? So what we can do is wrap all of this in its own VStack, paste it in there, and we can actually say alignment is not leading on this guy. And that'll move it all the way over very, very nicely, right? And then we can actually delete that property here. I think, no, we cannot. So it has to be in both places. So this gives you guys a really good example of what or how this stuff works, right? So not only did we have to put the alignment as leading on this VStack, we also had to put it on this VStack, because if we take it out here, although this whole VStack is aligned to the leading edge, this substack is not, right? So then we can paste that back in there. And you guys might be thinking, okay, well, maybe we don't need this VStack at all. I could just place it within the overall VStack and that would do the same thing. And you wouldn't be wrong in saying that, right? But the nice thing about having these two text components in its own VStack is that we can control the spacing between these two things as we see fit. So I can apply custom spacing. So maybe like 12 pixels, 4 pixels, right? To this text component that won't affect the overall VStack, right? So let me show you what I mean by that. So now if I want spacing between the text, or sorry, the image and this text, then I could apply spacing to this guy, like 32, just to give you guys a really good idea of what's going on. So this shows you how you can apply like more custom spacing between elements in a nested stack, guys. I know this might be starting to get confusing, but if you really stop and break it down and think about it, it's not that bad. So what really helps me is looking at the frame of things, right? So selecting that little arrow guy down there. So this whole thing represents this VStack. You see it highlights the code for us in the editor. So if you ever get confused, you can just do that, right? So if I select this entire VStack, it highlights the code that represents that item. So right now I applied a spacing of 32, but if I were to take this stuff out and just put it in this big VStack, it would be 32 pixels of spacing between each item in the VStack, right? Which looks really ugly. So if I wanted to have custom spacing between just these two elements, that's when placing it inside of its own VStack or substack comes in handy, right? Because now I can have custom spacing here and custom spacing between these two things. So now we've sort of chunked these two things together and this thing together in one stack. So now when we apply spacing, it'll treat this as just one big chunk of things. And then within this guy, we can apply our own custom spacing to that. Obviously, we don't want 32 pixels of spacing there. That was really just to show you guys how that stuff works. I think that looks just fine. And the 4 pixels of spacing looks good there as well. What I do want us to do though, guys, is, this is looking really good. And if you go and hit play, you'll notice that you can scroll through these items. I do want to customize this a little bit further though. So like now let's go one step back and think about how we can apply spacing between each one of our menu items. So we just looked at how to apply spacing in each individual menu item, but what if we want to now apply spacing between all of our menu items in this overall list, right? So what I can do there is wrap this for each loop inside of its own VStack. So let's just cut all that stuff. VStack. And now I can add spacing here. And I can say like 24 pixels. And you guys will notice that it now applies spacing between each item. So like if I said 64, just to get this really pronounced, you guys could see what that does there, right? So that just gives you guys an idea of how you can really like extract things into their own stacks to control the spacing between items. And once again, that's a much better option than just applying padding everywhere. So an alternative would have been to, let's take this for each loop and replace it right here. You could have, right, gone here and said .padding .vertical or something like that. And that'll give you some spacing between each one of your items the same way it would if we wrapped the whole thing in a VStack. And that's not necessarily wrong. I just prefer to use the spacing component on stacks, guys. And wrapping things in stacks to me makes a little bit more sense than just putting padding in random places. So let me go ahead and remove this. And let's go ahead and put this for each loop back in its own VStack and say spacing is 24. Right? Because now as a developer, when I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, this thing is its own VStack and it has 24 pixels of spacing between each item. And then each item inside of the for loop is like this menu item and all that stuff. So I just think that's a little bit more organized, right? So let's resume our preview and it looks really good. One more trick I want to show you guys before we end this video is what if we want this featured on Uber Eats guide to be like sticky, right? Like what if we don't want that to scroll with the menu? Well, here's how we can do that. We are once again gonna back all this stuff out into a VStack. So a quicker way to do that, guys, is you can just command click on this scroll view guy and make sure the canvas is open when you do this or this option won't come up. And you can hit embed in VStack and it automatically embeds all that stuff in a VStack for you. And what we're going to do is move this text outside of the scroll view. And now you'll notice that it's sort of like a sticky header, right? Which is super cool. So there might be some instances in which you guys want the whole thing to scroll, or you might want some instances where the header behaves as sort of a sticky header. And if we want to really finish out this UI and get this showing up on the left side of the screen, guys, we can just go ahead and add an alignment of dot leading to this VStack, and guess what? That'll show up on the left side of the screen there. So, and that is going to wrap it up for this video, guys. We just put together that incredible user interface that looks almost exactly like Uber Eats with less than like 50 lines of code, which is just absolutely incredible. So this is really starting to showcase the power of SwiftUI. And I know this stuff might be a little bit daunting right now, but I keep telling you guys, the more practice you get, the easier this is going to get. You're really starting to build a solid foundation, whether you realize it or not, because we are combining a lot of concepts that we have learned previously in the course to put things like this together. Stacks and texts and frames and clip shapes and all of that stuff, right? So you guys are getting better by the module. In the next one, we are going to be continuing on with grids in SwiftUI. So that's going to be super exciting, guys. We will see you there. Peace out. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video, we are going to be getting started with how to implement grids in SwiftUI. So let me just show you what we're going to be able to accomplish by the end of this video. We're going to be building out something that looks just like this. And this is very similar to what you'd see in an app like Instagram, where they display like a list of posts in this awesome grid format. And we're going to be able to accomplish this pretty easily in SwiftUI. So we're going to start with some of the basics of grids and how to use them before we get into creating this awesome UI that we see here. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a new module. So I am going to create a new group, guys. Call it grids. Move it underneath scroll views. Create a new SwiftUI view and call it grids module. Perfect. Okay. So let's go over getting started. Let's just jump right into it. So first thing we're going to do, guys, is add something called a lazy V grid. So this is going to be a container view that arranges its child views in a grid that grows vertically, creating items only as needed. And we're going to select this option here with the two initialization parameters. And that is going to be the columns and the content. So guys, what we're going to do is create this grid items array in just a little bit. For now, let's just go ahead and tab over to content and hit enter. And then we're just going to delete this code placeholder. And we'll go over what to put inside of the grid in just a little bit. I want us to create these columns and talk about what they are. So the reason we have to create these columns is because this tells SwiftUI how to render your grid. So you have to specify the number of columns that you want your grid to have. So for example, in the completed thing that we're going to build, this has 3 columns, right? And then we can individually size each item as we see fit, but the grid has 3 columns. So let's go ahead and create this grid item array and pass it into our lazy V grid. So we're going to say let columns be an array of grid items, and we are going to say equals and open up these brackets. And you guys are just going to say dot init, and dot init. So the reason we can just say dot init, guys, is because we've casted it as an array of grid items. If you didn't do this and just specified it to be like a blank array, you would have to specifically like specify that you want it to be a grid item. Tomato, it doesn't really matter how you do it. It's really just personal preference. And lucky for us, we can initialize these as with blank initializers like this. We don't have to do anything further, although we are going to go over some of the custom types of columns or grid items that we can use in these grids here. Let's just go ahead and pass this in here for now. And we are going to use a for loop here, guys, to create a bunch of grid items. So we can see here how we're utilizing things from past modules like we have been throughout this bootcamp. That's going to continue on. So we're going to use a for each loop. And let's go ahead and maybe just create like, I don't know, 50 grid items. We're going to say ID \self item in, and you can call this whatever you want. And then let's just go ahead and create like a rectangle and say .frame is width and height of 100 by 100. So you guys will notice that this looks pretty good, right? Like we have this awesome looking grid of all these grid items and we have exactly 3 columns. If I were to take one of these out, it would automatically adjust to have 2 columns. Just let the preview load and do its thing. It does look a little weird, and that's because our grid expands beyond the bounds of our screen. So very similar to what we did in the last video, guys. Like if I click on this, you guys can see that the grid goes beyond the bounds of the screen. You guys should be able to guess that if we place this in a scroll view, that will solve that problem and make this a scrollable list. So if you just command click onto Lazy V Grid, quick shortcut to do this, guys, is you can say embed in any one of these stacks and just replace that with scroll view. And now we have, if we hit play back on that, we have this scrollable list of grid items. And let me comment that back in to get 3 of them. And that looks really good, right? And you guys can add like as many grid items as you want. And you'll see here, that's what it looks like with 4 grid items. But if we were to try to add a 5th, you guys will notice something interesting. You're going to notice that this just turns into like one big blob of things. And that's because we're specifically setting the frame to be 100 by 100, and it can't fit all of that on the screen. So let's take a look at what would happen if we just deleted that, guys. You guys will notice that it automatically just like gives it a default height, and it fits these grid items or adjusts the width of them to fit the screen. And I could just keep going, right? I could say .init, and it's going to just automatically adjust the width of my grid items to fit all of them within the screen. And you guys will notice I could give this just a height of maybe 100, and that's sort of how it will look. So the grid is very adaptive and it's very responsive to different screen sizes, which is really, really nice for us, right? And we have a lot more customization here as well. So we have a couple of different options when we create these grid items, guys. If you go inside of one of the parentheses and hit dot, you guys will notice that there's a couple different cases or different types of grid items that we can build. We can build an adaptive one, we can build one with a fixed size, or we can build one with a flexible size. So if I go here and I say dot fixed of 100, you guys will notice that this might look a little different here in a second, right? So this says, okay, the first item in this grid guy has to have a height or a fixed size of 100. In this case, it's really just the width. Like I could make the height whatever I want. Let's see. Sometimes the preview like crashes. Right, so now it's like I can make the height whatever I want, but because I'm trying to fit this grid in the screen, this is going to say, hey, it basically has a fixed height of 100. And I could make this maybe, 150, and it'll expand it even further. And I could do that on another item, right? Like I could go here and say like dot fixed and maybe do like 80. And the preview isn't being nice to me, but I think you guys get the idea, right? It's going to make one of those other grid items in here a little bit bigger, right? And it will adapt your grid to fit that size. So let's see if we can just play around with this a little bit more and have some more fun. So let me just delete this stuff. We can also say like dot adaptive, guys. And this will give me an adaptive grid item, and I can set the minimum height for it. So I can say, hey, it's adaptive, but it has to be at least this big. So I could say it has a minimum height of maybe 50. I think, yeah. Okay, so that looks good. And then, it's not going to look too different, but like you guys get the idea. You can have adaptive items, you can have flexible items as well. So like, let me delete some of these guys. And let's just stick to maybe 3 of the items here. And let's make one of these guys flexible. So let's say flexible. And let's see what that looks like. And I think flexible has some options here. Minimum of, let's say like 300. And maximum of 400. So you guys can play around with this sort of infinitely, right? Like you can create really custom grids with something like you might see in Pinterest or even the Instagram Explore feed. There are custom grid items with custom heights, and this gives you an idea of how you can accomplish that, right? So this flexible guy behaves very similar to a spacer in that it sort of fills empty space, and then you can specify minimum and maximum heights. We're not going to do too much more of a deep dive into grids. It really depends on the UI you're trying to build. I think that definitely gives you guys some good exposure as to how they work and the different options that you can build out with these columns here. This is where it's important to understand what's going on, right? We have a scroll view. We create this lazy V grid. We supply it with some columns. We can customize those columns as we see fit. And then this is the content of that grid. And you're typically going to use a for each loop if you're displaying some like scrollable list of grid items here. You don't have to, but that's typically what you're going to do. So guys, now that we've gotten some exposure to that, let's see if we can go ahead and build out this guy here. So let's just see if we can figure out the math behind getting the grid items to fit 3 across the screen like that. And we're going to make this adaptive to different screen sizes. And then we are going to drop in all of our driver images into that grid as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is delete the minimum and maximum guy. And we're going to make all of these flexible. So we make all of them flexible so that they can adapt to different screen sizes, right? And the height and the width is what the height is what we need to figure out here. So we're going to say, let dimension equal, and let me show you guys how to figure out the width of your screen. We're going to say parentheses UI screen dot main dot bounds dot width. So this here will give me the width of my screen, right? No matter what device I'm using, whether it's an iPad, an iPhone Pro Max, a regular iPhone, this will always give me the width of my screen. So this is pretty helpful here. And we want 3 items, right? And we want all of these to be squares. So there is some math involved here, and we're going to figure this out. So if we want 3 items across the screen, we're going to say that we want this dimension, or the dimension of each item, to be the width of the screen divided by 3, right? And then we are going to replace this with our dimension, right? So that looks pretty good. However, our spacing is still just a little bit off. So really quickly, guys, let's go over how we can adjust this so that we get that very, very minimal amount of spacing between each item, right? Very similar to what we see like here. It's a much cleaner design, and it's going to give you guys an idea of how to further customize your grids and get the spacing that you would like. So it's actually not that hard, right? So our lazy V grid here has a spacing parameter very similar to a VStack, right? So we can control the spacing between rows with that. So if I go here and say spacing 1, you guys will notice it shrinks the spacing to 1 pixel between rows. If I did like 16, it would just spread my grid out, or each row of my grid, by 16 pixels, just like that. But we just want 1, right? So let's go ahead and resume our preview. And the only other thing we have to fix, guys, is the spacing between grid items. So we can do that up in our columns definition. So I can go and in my init, right after the 2 parentheses for the flexible grid item, you can say spacing 1. And then we can just add that to the next grid item as well. And you guys will notice how that fills out perfectly, right? That's why having this flexible grid item is so helpful here. We really just need to figure out the height of the grid item. So we can say spacing 1, and we'll see how that looks. And that looks really, really good to me, right? And guys, we don't need to apply spacing to this guy simply because there is nothing next to it, right? Like if you apply another spacing of 1 here, I'm pretty sure it's not going to do anything, right? Because there's nothing next to it. When we apply it to these 2, this one has this next to it, this one has this next to it, which is why we say that we want 1 pixel of spacing between the items. And then this guy controls the spacing between rows right here. So that looks really good, right? That was so easy to put together. It just involved a little bit of math, which wasn't too bad. Now, guys, what we want to do is just grab all of the driver image names. And we had that, I believe, from another module. I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in here. So we have all of our driver image names. right here. And guys, instead of looping through 0 to 50, we are just going to say driver. And then we're going to say driver in. And we notice that that is looking good. It creates 9 items for us and we're looking good. Now, what we need to do is just create an image with that driver. So we're going to say image driver. Obviously, that's going to look terrible. We need to resize it, right? And slowly coming together, it still looks like trash though. We just need to make sure that we explicitly set the frame and stuff of it. So we're going to say dot scaled to fill, because that's the aspect ratio we want for our images. And then we are going to say dot frame, height is our dimension. And then we are going to say, oops, dot clip, shape is a rectangle. So that's not looking too bad, right? So something that we'll notice, guys, is that Daniel Ricciardo is being an asshole here, right? He's sort of bleeding over into the edges of the other photos. So let's see if we can fix that. I believe if you guys were to remove the scale to fill, it would adjust and it would fit correctly. But then you notice the aspect ratio here is a little bit off, right? So if we comment that back in, that's like the correct aspect ratio for his image. And in order for us to make sure that it fits within this frame, we can just specifically specify the width of it as well. And it can just be equal to this dimension right here. And you guys will notice that that solves our problem. And now we have an even 1 pixel of spacing between all of our items, and it looks really good. If you guys wanted just a little bit of spacing on the edges, like if we wanted to add 1 pixel of spacing on the left and right side of our grid, what we could do is go here and say dot padding dot horizontal and literally just give it 1 pixel. And that will sort of give us the spacing we want on the edges here. But now you guys notice that because of that, our images don't have the spacing between them from column to column. And to fix that, because we just added 2 pixels of space on either side, or it was 1 pixel of space on either side, 1 plus 1 equals 2. If we just subtracted 2 from our dimension, guys, you'll notice that everything should look good. Yep, so that looks perfect, right? And let me just add a note here to remember that why we did that. So we can say subtract 2 when we add 1 pixel of spacing on each horizontal edge, right? So that should make sense to you if you guys think about it. We added a pixel on the left and a pixel on the right of spacing. So we had to adjust the dimension of our grid item by subtracting 2 to account for that. Similarly, if I did 2 pixels of horizontal padding, let's see, I'm not sure if that's adjusting, but I think you guys get the idea here. So that just gives you guys a detailed breakdown on how to create a really amazing adaptive grid for your user interfaces. So this would literally fit on any phone size, any screen size, and you guys could verify that by like testing this out on different phone sizes, right? So I just selected 14 Pro Max and it will adjust my preview. Let's go ahead and take a look just to make sure that that works with a different sized phone, a larger phone in particular. And for some reason, guys, my preview is not loading the iPhone 14 Pro. So what I went ahead and did was just launch the app on 2 different versions of the simulator, the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I'll show you guys how to do that in a second. And you guys can see here that my grid is adapting beautifully to both screen sizes, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max is obviously a larger phone and everything looks as expected. So that's a beautiful adaptive grid that we have created there. If you guys want to launch the app and have it open up to our grids module, all you need to do is go to the app file up here and replace content view with grids module, select the simulator that you want to run the app on and hit Command R or play, and it will run it on that device. And then you guys can compare the different grids on whatever device sizes that you like. So that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Peace. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In this video, we're going to be covering lists in SwiftUI. So lists are really cool, and they are a fundamental component in SwiftUI used for displaying collections of data. And they're really nice because they give us a lot of functionality and styling right out of the box. So let's go ahead and create our lists module and get started with our implementation here. So we're going to create a new folder for lists, same as always, and a new SwiftUI view called lists module. And we're just going to jump right into this, guys. So I want you to go ahead and just type out list and open up some brackets, and just go ahead and add a simple text component. Say like item 1. And let's take a quick pause here and check this out. So we noticed that SwiftUI automatically gave us this styling of this sort of list item for free, right? We can see that it is already wrapped inside of a scroll view, and it's a vertically scrollable sort of list already. And like I said, they give us this styling where it's like they give us this background color and this nice corner radius, and all of that comes right out of the box here. And if you were to add another item, so text item 2, let's take a look at this. It automatically sticks that divider in there for us. Like I said, it's this scrollable list. And it's really nice that we get this all out of the box from SwiftUI. It saves us a lot of time and with like styling and stuff to display vertically scrollable lists of data, right? And there's a lot more customization that we can add here, as well as functionality, which we're going to cover in this video. So guys, this is also compatible with for each loops. So you could imagine if I wanted to display like 100 items, I could just go ahead and create one of my for each loops here, say like 0 up to 100, ID \self, index in, and I could say text item and index, right? And you guys will notice that it automatically generates that scrollable list of 100 items for me. So this is really cool. Let's keep going with how much we can, or with how we can customize these lists and add functionality to them. Like for example, swiping to delete, editing our list, and all of that cool stuff. So another really awesome feature about lists, guys, is that we can create sections. So let's go ahead and delete this, and let's maybe create a section here and another section here. And to display information in these sections, guys, I'm just going to paste in some data that I have here. This is our drivers array that we have in some other place in the app. You guys can either go copy and paste that or type this out. And I'm also going to paste in an array for these teams that we see here. So these are all the teams, and these are all the drivers. So in each individual section, I can actually display like a list of drivers or a list of teams. Like I can associate one particular data source or array with a particular section, which is really cool. So I could go here and say like for each drivers ID \self driver in text driver. And then I can do the same thing for my teams. I can just copy and paste this teams team in and say team. And you guys will notice that I now have 2 sections of data in my list, which is so cool. And this is like barely any code to get all of this really awesome functionality and design, like I said, right out of the box, guys. So this is super convenient, and it's a really powerful feature that we get from SwiftUI. And we can further customize these sections by adding titles to them, or headers. And it's as simple as this. We can just open up some parentheses after our section declaration, and I can just go ahead and pass in a string, and you guys will notice that it supplies my section with a header here, which is so cool. And I could go here and say teams. And we get all of this styling for free, guys. And this really just coincides with all of Apple's design guidelines. You've probably seen designs very similar to this in like your settings app on the iPhone, which is obviously natively built by Apple. And having all of this styling for free is absolutely incredible. So let's keep going with how much more we can customize these lists and apply different stylings, and also some, like I said before, some different actions, and see how easy it's going to be to do that. So on this list, guys, let's go ahead and say .list style. And there's a couple different list styles that we can apply here. For example, I could say plain list style, and you guys will notice that completely changes the look of my list here, right? And we even get these like sort of sticky headers when we apply that functionality, which is so cool. This is more similar to like your contacts app, right? So by simply adding this list style modifier, I can completely change the look of my list and make it more customizable to suit your design needs. So what I like to do is leverage the use of autocomplete here. So you can start typing out list style and all of the different list styles should come up. So if we say default list style, that's what it looks like, right? You guys notice we have this sort of gray background color, and then each list item is white. And this works out of the box with dark mode as well, guys. So you could go ahead and click this little toggle guy down here, toggle this color scheme on, and you guys will notice that we get this dark mode functionality for free, 100%. So that saves us a lot of time and effort there as well. And there's a couple other ones, like we can say inset list style, and I'm not sure if it's going to look any different. Oh yeah, it does. Cool. One that's really, really cool is the sidebar list style. And this makes your menu items collapsible, which is so cool, or your list items collapsible. So like I can collapse my sections, which is just awesome that we get all of that functionality for free. So this is just such an incredible feature, and it's so powerful, guys. It's highly performant. And you can see here that this is literally like just over 10 lines of code, right? They're like, to get all of that out of the box is incredible. And let's go ahead and keep going. There's more customization that we can add, mainly swipe actions that we can add to these list items. So let's go ahead and see if we can do that. So on this list item right here, guys, when you see the ending bracket for the for each loop, let's go ahead and say .onDelete. And there's going to be this thing that says perform, and we can hit enter on that. And you guys are going to notice that we get access to some sort of index set, right? So let's go ahead and say indices, which is the plural of index. And basically what an index set is, guys, is it's going to look at the section that you're in as well as the row item of that list. So for example, what I mean by that is if we looked at Lewis Hamilton, he's in the first section and he's the first item. But if we looked at teams, we're in the second section and the first item is Mercedes, right? So that's sort of what an index set is. It looks at the section and the row. So another example would be Yuki Tsunoda. He's in section 1, item 3. And here, if we looked at Red Bull, that's section 2, item 3. So we can have multiple items that match up with each other. They could just be in different sections. So why is that important? Well, it's important so we know which item that we want to delete. So I can go here and just say drivers.remove at or remove at offsets and pass in those indices right there. And let's go ahead and rebuild this. Right, so you guys will notice that you get this error. Cannot use mutating member on immutable value. Self is immutable. So this is a little confusing, but basically the reasoning behind that is that SwiftUI views are structs, and you can't directly modify properties on structs from within them without adding some sort of mutation property, right? So in order to do that with SwiftUI, and if you guys don't understand that, that's okay. We're going to cover this more in detail in the coming videos. This is sort of just your introduction to this. When we go and declare this drivers array, guys, if you go and make this something called a state property, so say at state var drivers, this gives you that mutation capability. So now we can mutate this array and remove drivers from it, even though this is a struct and we're inside of that struct and trying to modify something from within that struct. That gets more into the details of what structs are. Like I said, don't worry too much about that. We're going to cover that in more detail as the course goes on. But you guys will notice that now what I get is this absolutely incredible swipe to delete option, right? And guys, I can just go ahead and swipe all the way through and it will just delete that driver for me. Or I could go here and tap on it to remove the swipe action. I could just tap delete and it deletes it for me. We get all of those animations and everything absolutely free with this on delete modifier. And you guys will notice that it only applies to this particular section, I would have to add that to this guy as well. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep it here for now. Another really awesome feature that we get, guys, is the ability to edit items in a list. We're not going to cover that in this module because there is something else we have to do in order to make that work. And I want us to come back to this module a little bit later on in order to introduce that functionality. But basically, it's the ability to like drag and drop items in different places in the list or section, which is super cool. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this list module, guys. All in all, it's a super powerful tool that we have in SwiftUI to display vertically scrolling lists of data. And they give us so much functionality and designs right out of the box for free just with this list module right here, or list API. So that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. In the next one, we're going to be getting a lot more in detail with these state properties and what they are. And we're going to start doing some more fun stuff with introducing actual functionality into our apps by taking a look at buttons. And we're going to actually introduce like clickable buttons and have them do stuff when we click on them, which is going to be so much fun. So get excited for that. We will see you there. Peace out. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. Hope you are doing well. In our last module, we covered lists with SwiftUI. In this module, we are going to be going over how to introduce buttons into our applications. We're going to be adding functionality to them so that when we click on a button, we can make stuff happen. We're going to be covering how to style buttons and customize them and all that good stuff. And as mentioned in the last video, we are going to be going over what exactly this state property wrapper means and why we need it in SwiftUI and what it's used for and all that good stuff. So guys, I took the liberty of creating the buttons module already. So you guys can just go ahead and do that now, create a new folder and make a file that says buttons module. And once you do that, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So we're going to see just how easy it is to create a button here. Let's go ahead and just type out button, and you guys will notice that we get a couple different initialization options, right? We can pass in some sort of configuration, some sort of title, and then provide it with an action and a label. So we're just going to start with this guy first. So I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to be the string protocol and an action, right? So the string, we can just say click me, and for this action, this is what we want to happen when we actually click this button. So let's go ahead and hit enter on that. And what we put inside of these brackets, is the code that will execute once we tap that button. So this is really cool, right? Now we can actually introduce functionality into our apps with like clickable buttons here. So I'm just going to say print button clicked. And guys, if I pull up this console down here, I had this there from before, but if you go ahead and click this button, you'll notice that print statement shows up beautifully there, right? So we are successfully executing an action with a button that we just created. And it's literally 3 lines of code. So it doesn't get simpler than that. Okay. So how do we introduce like actual functionality relative to an app, right? Obviously, we're not just going to be printing stuff out when we click buttons. When we click something, we probably want something to happen on the screen, right? So let's go ahead and just create like a rectangle here, guys. So really quickly, I'm just going to comment this out. I want us to create a VStack, and let's create a rectangle. And let's go ahead and say dot frame width and height is 200 by 100. Dot corner radius is 10. And let's go ahead and give it a foreground color of dot blue. And what we're going to do, guys, is introduce the ability to change the background color of this rectangle when we click a button. So let's go ahead and add our button back to this VStack. Let's go ahead and comment this back in, hit Command X to cut it, and paste it below our rectangle. So ideally, like I said before, what we want to do is click this button and have this change the color of that rectangle. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that, and then we're going to break it down. So let's just go up to the top of our file, guys. So below the struct declaration, but above the body, and we are going to create a state property here. So I'm going to say @state var rectangle color equals color dot blue. So what we're going to do is, instead of passing in this hard-coded value of blue, we're going to make our code a little bit more dynamic here and pass in this rectangle color as the foreground color. So now, ideally, guys, anytime I modify this rectangle color, it will change the color of my rectangle to be whatever that is equal to. So it starts out as blue, and if I click this button, I want to modify it to something else. So instead of saying just button clicked, let's just go here and say background color, or sorry, rectangle color equals .pink. And if you guys go ahead and click that button, you'll notice that it changes to pink, which is so cool, right? It's that simple. But there's a lot to unpack here, right? And this is going to get into the ins and outs of how SwiftUI works as a declarative programming language. So let's go ahead and talk about what this state property guy is here. So I'm going to pull up a diagram to help us understand this, right? So really quickly, guys, let's just take a look at this. SwiftUI views are a function of state. When we modify a state property, the view reconfigures with that updated state. We don't modify views directly. This is the essence of declarative programming. So basically, we have some view here, and it's a function of state, right? F of s equals v means that our view is some function of state, right? So when we modify a state property, we modify the state of our view, and then the view redraws itself with and updates with the modified state. So let's go ahead and break down how that applies to our code here. So right now, we have declared this state property as this rectangle color, right? So our view now knows that it is in some way dependent on this state property because we've passed it in here. So this explains how our view is a function of state, right? So when I modify this state property, it's going to redraw my view and reconfigure it with the updated state. So what exactly does that mean? Here is where I am modifying the state. So it changes this rectangle color. SwiftUI recognizes that some state property has been changed, so it knows that now it needs to redraw the view. So what do I mean by that? Well, guys, literally what SwiftUI does is it throws away the existing state of the view, right? So when it was blue originally, it just takes that and it tosses it. It basically destroys that view. And then it redraws the view with the updated state where the rectangle color is now pink. And that's how we get this pink rectangle here. So this state guy that we see is what's known as a property wrapper, guys. So it's used to create and manage mutable state within a view. It's a fundamental concept that allows you to store and track changes to a value so your view can automatically update whenever that value changes. State is used primarily for managing small amounts of mutable data that are specific to a single view. So I am going to copy and paste this for you guys, just so you have that as notes. And this will be available in the completed source code, guys, or you could just pause and type that out. So that's just basically an explanation of what state properties are. So once again, guys, this is the essence of how SwiftUI works. All views are a function of state. We do not modify views directly. We simply modify state properties and the view redraws itself with that updated state. So let's do some more examples here, guys. Have some more fun with this stuff so we can get a better understanding of it. So I'm going to create a text component as well. So I'm going to say text hello. And let's make the font of this like .title. So what we're going to do, and the reason we're adding this text component, guys, is we're going to change both the background color and the title of this text when we click on buttons. So let me go ahead and give this button some, or let's give this button some padding just to get some spacing there. Right. So now let's go ahead and create another button, guys. I want to show you how to create a more custom button. This is a very basic button. We can make our buttons look like whatever the heck we want, which is really cool. We are just going to select this different option here. So it's going to be action and label. So if you hit that, it's going to ask us for the action first. You can just hit enter on that guy and it will expand the brackets for both of those closures. So here we're going to leave that blank for now. Let's go ahead and just create this button label. So when we have a label, guys, that means we can create any view component in SwiftUI that we want. So I can make this a text component and I'm going to call it custom button. I'm going to say .font is .headline. And you guys can see here that I'm already getting some of that customization, whereas here, this is just a raw string, and it renders that with sort of this like default button look from SwiftUI. Here, we're just going to keep customizing this guy. We're going to say .frame width and height is 360 by 48. Background is blue. Foreground color is white. Corner radius is 10. Oh, not contrast, corner radius. So you guys will notice that that is like a really good looking custom button right there, right? Like this is what you might see in an actual mobile application that has some nice design. So let's go ahead and add some functionality to this button, guys. Let's maybe change the rectangle color. Let's maybe make our button purple here. Background is .purple. Rectangle color equals .purple. Right, so now I can click this guy and it'll make it purple. I can click this guy and it'll make it pink, right? But let's imagine we wanted to change the text here too. So let's go ahead and make another state property, because why are we making a state property, guys? Well, it's because we want something on our view or our screen to change when we click this button. So the way things work in SwiftUI, you have to make a state property to do that. So we're going to say state var title. And it's just going to equal a blank string, or let's make it say hello. So instead of passing in that text right there, what we can do is pass in our title. So now our view is a function of two different state properties, right? This rectangle color, which is right here, and now this title, which we are using right here. So in this button action here, I can now also change the title text, and it will also reconfigure my view with that updated title text, because it's being used as a property right here with that text component. So I could say title equals basic button. So now I click this and it will change both the rectangle color and the text for me now, guys. So I can modify as many state properties I want when I'm clicking on a button. And similarly here, I can say title equals custom button. So now if I click this guy, it changes to custom button in purple. If I click this guy, it changes to basic button in pink. Let me show you guys one more example of another button that's like more customizable. We can create another button with an action and a label and just hit enter on action, and it will expand both those closures for us. We'll hold off on the action for now. Let's go ahead and see if we can make an image, guys. So we're going to say image, system name, heart.circle.fill. And you guys will notice that this is now a clickable button in the form of an image. So this is so cool, right? We can make our buttons look however we want with any sort of SwiftUI view component, whether it's a text, an image, an icon, anything you want, guys. Any view component can be passed into this label closure here, which is so cool. And let's go ahead and say .resizable, .frame, width and height of 80 by 80, .foreground color, and let's maybe do like, I don't know, .green. Or let's make it red, right? Yeah, so that looks really cool. And now let's just go ahead and copy and paste these two lines of code, guys, and paste it in here. And we can say rectangle color equals red. And this guy is now going to equal image button. And I can click on this and boom, it does the exact same thing, right? I think you guys get that concept. And this just goes to show you how we can introduce buttons into the app with functionality, guys, and how state properties work, and a big insight as to how SwiftUI works in general, right? So this is a concept a lot of people don't understand, and it's something that's glossed over significantly. And that's because it's hard to understand, right? What exactly the state property is and how SwiftUI works as a declarative programming interface. And this video, I think, is a great introduction to that. If you guys are still confused and want more information about that, you can simply just Google how SwiftUI works and what state properties are. But just to do a quick recap before we move on to the next video, guys, in SwiftUI, views are a function of state. So anytime we want to modify our view or add some functionality to it or change the way it looks, we introduce these state properties. And then in this case, we are modifying those state properties with buttons. And every time we modify them, the view throws away the existing state and redraws itself with the updated state. And in this case, our state properties are this title and this color. So when we modify them, the components that are dependent on those states, right? In this case, the rectangle is dependent on the rectangle color, and the text is dependent on the title component right here, that state guy right there. The view will redraw itself and reconfigure with those updated state properties, so that when I click that button, it modifies the state, the view redraws, and gives me back the correct or updated state. So that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. I hope all that makes sense, and we are going to keep going with some more really awesome SwiftUI concepts that are going to help us introduce more functionality into our apps, right? Up to this point, we've just been doing really pretty user interfaces. Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this stuff, where we're actually introducing functionality into our apps so that users can actually use them and have the app do something, right? Like, that's the core foundation of being an app developer. Apps got to do stuff. So we're going to keep going with this, and it's going to be super fun. So get excited for that, guys. We'll see you there. Peace. Hey, what's going on, guys? That is actually going to wrap it up for this free version of the SwiftUI Bootcamp. If you guys would like to continue learning with me, go ahead and head over to my website at stephancodes.com. And the link for that is going to be in the description. And if you guys go into the courses section, you will be able to see the rest of that SwiftUI Bootcamp, the pro version of this course. Also have a bunch of awesome professional courses here as well, where you guys can continue learning with me, and you guys can get access to all of this stuff completely free by becoming a member. So if you guys are ready to invest in yourself and take your career to the next level, whether you're trying to go pro right now, you're trying to advance your skills as an iOS developer, whatever it may be, guys, you can just go ahead and sign up and become a member with me here at AppStuff and take your learning to the next level. This gets you unlimited access to everything on the site, and you can cancel any time. So it's low risk, high reward, with high quality content available to you 24 hours a day. You guys can go ahead and check that out. We also have a bunch of professional app templates that you guys can check out. These are ready-made source code templates that just work right out of the box with high-level functionality. You guys can check those out as well. And once again, if you guys sign up and become a member, you get access to all of this stuff for free. So you get access to thousands of dollars worth of material, thousands of hours of professional course content by becoming a member, guys. So the value is absolutely insane. Guys, go ahead and make sure you check my website out at stephancodes.com. Our students are getting hired at top companies like Meta, Apple, Tesla, Google, and we can help you guys do that too and really change your life. So go ahead and check that out. The link is in the description. And thanks for watching this bootcamp with me, guys. Hope to see you in the pro version. Peace.